The final section of this book is about careers, your career. The first chapter is called Finding the Right Job. My feeling is that if you find it, you'll never really work again. There is an old saying that you can only live life forward and understand it backward. The same thing could be said about careers. Every time I ask successful people about their first few jobs, the immediate reaction is almost laughter. The chairman and CEO of Procter & Gamble, A.G. Lafley, thought he was going to be a professor of Renaissance history. That career plan evaporated when he dropped out of graduate school to join the Navy for 2 years, and then spent 6 more running grocery and specialty stores near a Navy base in Tokyo. Or take Meg Whitman. She started her career as a management consultant, then joined Disney to open its first stores in Japan, then moved to StrideRite to revive its Keds brand, then took over the Aileen Floral Company, FTD, and then moved to Hasbro to run its Play School and Mr. Potato Head divisions. It makes perfect sense that Meg Whitman would end up as the CEO of eBay, the retailer of absolutely everything, doesn't it? But there was nothing specifically planned about her career. eBay didn't even exist until a few years ago. The point is, it is virtually impossible to know for sure where any given job will take you. In fact, if you meet someone who has managed to faithfully follow a career plan, try not to get seated beside him at a dinner party. What a bore. I'm obviously not going to tell you to let fate take its course. A great job can make your life exciting and give it meaning. The wrong job can drain the life right out of you. But how do you find the right job? The first answer to that question is simple. You endure the same gummy, time-consuming, up and down, iterative process that all working people go through. You take one job, discover what you like and don't like about it, and what you're good and bad at, and then in time change jobs within your company or at another company to get something closer to the right fit. And you do that until one day you realize, hey, I'm finally in the right job. I like what I'm doing, and I'm making the trade-offs I'm willing to make. Yes, trade-offs, because few jobs are perfect. You may love your work with every fiber of your being, but wish the money were better. Or you may only like the work, but love your colleagues. Regardless of its dimensions, the right job for you exists. My goal in this chapter is to make finding that job a somewhat shorter and hopefully less mysterious process. How? Luckily, most jobs send out signals about how right they are for you or not. Those signals apply to jobs at every level of an organization. You can be right out of school, a middle manager trying to move up, or a senior executive looking for a top job. Now, there are special situations in the job search process that require separate consideration. Finding your first job, finding a job if you're stuck in a situation, and finding a job after you've been let go. More about those at the end of this chapter. First, let's look at the general signals, both good and bad, of job fit. Before we talk about each of these signals in more detail, a few thoughts about money, the elephant in the middle of the room during any job discussion. There is nothing worse than a guy who's made some money along the way, opining that money shouldn't matter to people who are picking a job. So I won't do that. In fact, I'll tell you that of course money matters. It matters a lot. When I took my first job, I had several offers, but the one from GE was $1,500 a year more than any other. Coming out of graduate school, I was broke. That $1,500 felt huge, and it made a difference in my decision. A year later, I got my first raise from GE. When I found out that it was exactly the same amount as everyone else in my unit, my fanatical belief in merit pay made me say, forget this place. But I didn't quit until I found another job at a chemical company in Skokie, Illinois, which is going to pay me 25% more. I ultimately ended up being persuaded to stay with GE, but I wouldn't have if the company hadn't matched my salary offer in Skokie. Because there is no way to disentangle money from decisions about job and career, the best you can really do is to come to terms with just how much money matters to you. Just remember, it can feel very noble to say that you don't care about being rich. It's another thing to live with that decision over the years, especially as mortgages and tuitions start to pile up. There is nothing inherently wrong with wanting money or feeling indifferent to it or anything in between. But if you're not honest with yourself about those feelings during the first years of your job journey, you'll end up doing a lot of second-guessing later. Now on to the signals of job fit, which have been listed in no particular order since they all count. That said, the first signal concerns people, because everything else about a job can be perfect: the task, pay, location. But if you do not enjoy your colleagues on a day-to-day basis, work can be torture. This may seem obvious, but I'm surprised how often I meet people who have taken jobs in companies where they do not share the organization's overall sensibilities. By that I mean a range of values and personality traits and behaviors, from how intense people act, to how comfortable they are with confrontation, to how candid they are about performance, to how much they laugh at meetings. If you join a company where your sensibilities don't fit in, you'll find yourself putting on a persona just to get along. What a career killer to fake who you are every day. I know a woman, we'll call her Claire, who was an MBA who became a manager for a nonprofit after graduation. At first, Claire thought she had the perfect job. She could use her business skills to run an organization and still make the world a better place, to use her words. But several years later, Claire was at her wit's end. Her colleagues made every decision at a snail's pace. It doesn't make any difference if we're picking where to have lunch or coming up with a marketing plan, she recounted. Nobody can ever feel not heard. Everybody has to reach consensus. It's driving me crazy. This organization has all the right intentions, but nothing ever gets done. Finally, Claire decided she could no longer tolerate the sensibilities mismatch she felt in a nonprofit environment, and she began to search for a consulting job in the private sector. She identified one firm in particular that was known for its pro bono work, and she consoled herself with the notion that she could work there and still keep one foot or toe in the so-called virtuous world. The problem was the firm wouldn't hire her. You haven't worked at the same speed or with the same kind of intensity we require, they told her. We need someone who can hit the ground running. Basically, they said, we need someone like us. Claire is still at a nonprofit job, resigned to stay there and make the best of it. The sad thing is, she said, I found my people at that consulting firm, but it was too late. They just didn't see I could be like them. You too need to find your people. The earlier in your career, the better. Even if a job seems ideal in every other way, without the presence of shared sensibilities, it's not ideal for you. The second job fit signal concerns opportunity, as in how much does the job offer you to grow and learn. Without doubt, it can be very appealing to take a job where you suspect you will have no problem hitting it out of the park. Surefire success has its rewards in the soul and the pocketbook. But any job you take should feel somewhat challenging going in. It should make you think, I can do most of the work, but there are certainly skills and knowledge this job requires that I don't have yet. I'm going to learn something here. In other words, any new job should feel like a stretch, not a layup. Why? Because stretching, growing, learning, all these activities keep you engaged and energized. They have the effect of making work more interesting, and they keep your head in the game. Yes, a stretch job does increase the possibility of you screwing up. That's why you should also make sure you join a company where learning is truly a value. Growth for every employee is a real objective. Mistakes aren't always fatal, and there are lots of people around whom you can reach out to for coaching and mentoring. Incidentally, stretching doesn't and shouldn't just happen at the beginning of a person's career. Take the case of Robert Bagby, who runs the brokerage firm A.G. Edwards. Bob says that he has twice taken on real stretch jobs, 26 years apart. The first was when he began as a broker for another firm in Kansas City. The second time was in 2001, when he was named chairman and CEO of A.G. Edwards. At first, being a broker. My God, I had no idea what I was doing or why I had taken the job, Bob said recently. The phone was like a dangerous weapon. I was afraid to touch it. Within a few months, though, Bob had learned enough new skills to start to excel. He came to love the brokerage business, and soon enough, his territory expanded and promotions started rolling in. He didn't feel out of his element again until the A.G. Edwards board picked him for the top position. It was that same feeling again, Bob says. There's no pre-training to be a CEO. All your past history and all your past successes, they don't really matter anymore. You have to earn your respect all over again. Bob's promotion to CEO couldn't have come at a more challenging time. The internet bubble had burst, and the market was collapsing after 9/11. Bob had to oversee the firm's first workforce reduction and redirect its culture. I'd say it took a year for me to get on solid footing again, he said. Today, things are really back to normal. It's fun now. Bob's story, like so many others, illustrates you shouldn't be afraid of a job that feels too big at the outset. If you're any good, which is why you are hired or promoted in the first place, you'll grow into it and be better for the experience. If the opportunity signal is about finding a job that allows you to grow and stretch while you are there, the option signal is about finding a job that helps you if you leave. Working for some companies is like winning an Olympic medal. For the rest of your career, you are associated with great performance and success. The consulting firm McKinsey & Company is like that. Because it is known to hire the world's top MBAs for their intelligence and intensity, and because of its reputation for intensive training, its alumni always get attention in the job market. By the same token, when I was in my early days of hiring in plastics, we were always trying to hire people away from DuPont, and we considered a real coup when we did. It may not have been true, but we had it in our heads that if you got a DuPont engineer, you were getting the most cutting-edge knowledge of processes and techniques. Microsoft, Walmart, and Johnson & Johnson also have enormous employee brands, which is to say their people get a real credential just by working there for a few years. Even putting my biases aside, GE is also in this category. Today, 5 of its former employees are CEOs in the Dow Jones 30. Many more are currently CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, and thousands more are executives at companies around the world. Obviously, you cannot let the employee brand phenomenon totally drive your job decisions. You could end up at a highly respected company only to discover your boss is terrible or your job responsibilities are limited. But these kind of situations are less likely at the kind of good companies we're talking about. You may be thinking that I'm writing off small companies with this advice. Not true. Some small companies offer experiences and exposure that cannot be beat. You get a chance to manage people earlier in your career, run projects or units sooner, not to mention negotiate acquisitions and work more closely with the CEO and the board. When you're ready to move on, you won't have the credential of a prestigious company, but you will have a lot of mileage. That really counts at all kinds of places, especially other small companies, venture capital firms, and entrepreneurial startups. There is a second part of the option signal. Some companies open or close doors for you because of their reputation. Others do that because of their industry. Back in the 60s, being in plastics was a ticket to the future. The industry was booming, with new applications being developed every day. In the 70s, because of the energy crisis, you had job offers coming out of your ears if you had a degree or work experience in geology. And of course, people who got involved in high technology and finance in the late 80s and 90s had a good long run of it. At speaking engagements, I am often asked what industries I would recommend to college grads and MBAs today. I tell them to look into companies doing business at the intersection of biology and information technology. And I suggest they learn everything they can about China, because it'll permeate every aspect of business in their lifetimes. This reminds me of something said by a very successful executive I know of who served in the Air Force before he began his business career. He is frequently contacted by headhunters, and he says his first questions about a potential job are just like those he asked as a fighter pilot, assessing situational awareness. When I was on a mission, I would always ask, what's our altitude? What are the weather conditions ahead? Where's the enemy? I think it's the same thing in business, he said. You need to know the same kinds of things about a job or an industry. Are you getting yourself into a turnaround situation? Are the economics fatal? How tough is the competition? Has the industry peaked, or is it just getting off the ground? Are the expectations of me reasonable, or am I walking into a time bomb? Now you can ask these questions and find that the job you like has a problematic future. The airline industry has very tough economics and relatively low pay, especially for managerial positions. The hospitality and publishing industries are likewise not very flush. Still, some people just love the romance of air travel, the adventure of the hotel business, and the excitement of creating books. If you are one of them, of course you should enter these fields. Just do so with your eyes open. Every job you take is a gamble that could increase your options or shut them down. The next signal is about ownership. Who you're really taking a job for. A few years ago, a manager I know was visited in her office by the son of a business acquaintance. He was about to graduate from Harvard, and he needed career advice about 2 worlds she was very familiar with: investment banking and management consulting. The student hair combed neatly and dutifully dressed in a suit, came prepared with a list of questions. What was the difference, he asked, between the major consulting firms? What kind of assignments could he expect during his first year on Wall Street? And so on. The manager had worked in consulting before joining a consumer goods company and had many acquaintances in investment banking, and so she answered each question thoroughly. She watched as the senior took careful notes, but she could tell he wasn't particularly curious about anything she said. In fact, after a half hour or so, he thanked her politely and stood to leave. As he was doing so, he tucked his pad inside a folder, which the manager noticed was completely covered with intricate drawings of cars. "Wow, these are amazing. Who did them?" she asked. Suddenly, the senior was filled with energy. "I did. I'm always drawing cars," he said. "My dorm room is covered with posters and paintings of cars. I subscribe to every car magazine. I've been obsessed with cars since I was 5 years old. My whole life I've wanted to be a car designer. That's why I'm always going to car shows and NASCAR races. I went to Indianapolis last year. I drove there." The manager shook her head in disbelief. "You've got to go work in Detroit," she said. "Why in the world are you thinking about consulting or banking?" The senior deflated as quickly as he had come to life. "My dad says the car business is not what I went to Harvard for." For the next few minutes, the manager tried to change the student's mind, but she quickly realized she was getting drawn into family dynamics that were none of her business. She was not surprised a few months later when she bumped into the young man's father, and he proudly told her that his son was working 80-hour weeks at a Wall Street firm. Look, over the course of our careers, we all take jobs to meet the needs or dreams of other people. Parents, spouses, teachers, or classmates. That's not necessarily wrong, unless you don't realize you're doing it. Because working to fulfill someone else's needs or dreams almost always catches up with you. I know someone who literally became a doctor because his entire childhood, his mother, a Polish immigrant who loved the American dream, introduced him by saying, "And here's my doctor." He didn't hate the profession, but you've never met anyone more eager to retire. Similarly, there are countless stories of people who take jobs because their spouses want them to travel less. Then what invariably happens is that the compromising partner loses out on a promotion because of curtailed mobility. Sometimes blame gets flung everywhere. Other times it just sits there and simmers. The hard reality is there is no foolproof way out of the ownership bind. Especially as you get older, life and relationships can be complicated. Very few people have the total freedom and independence to take a job just for themselves. There are tuitions to pay, spouses with their own careers, and yes, inner voices saying what you should do with your life, even when you're long past being a college senior. That is why the only real defense against job ownership backfiring is to be explicit with yourself about the person or people for whom you are taking your job. Over the course of your career, your Detroit will surely call you at one point or another. If you can go, that's great. If you can't, make peace with the reasons why. Work content is our last signal, but it could just as easily come first. Every job has bad days or rough periods. And yes, there'll be times when you work mainly to make ends meet. But in the very best job scenario, you love the work, at least something about it. It just excites you. The customers, the travel, the camaraderie at the Tuesday morning sales meeting, whatever. Something about the job makes you want to come back day after day. Sometimes it is the sheer challenge of the job that turns your crank. Take the case of Joel Klein, the Chancellor of the New York City Department of Education. I've gotten to know Joel through my work with the school system's Leadership Academy for Principals. It is no exaggeration to say that Joel could have any number of prestigious, high-paying jobs as a corporate general counsel or CEO. As the Assistant Attorney General in charge of the U.S. Department of Justice Antitrust Division in the 1990s, he took on Microsoft in a highly publicized battle, and later was chairman and CEO of the U.S. division of Bertelsmann, the global media company. There is no glamour and very little glory in the school reform job Joel accepted in 2002. It goes without saying he took a massive pay cut to become chancellor, but in taking the job, Joel also agreed to deconstruct an insanely bureaucratic system with about 1 million students in more than 1,300 schools and a $15 billion budget. He immediately encountered entrenched interests, including fierce union leaders who were hell-bent on keeping the status quo. But in the face of that, he remained steadfast. Virtually every day, Joel appears in one of the New York papers, and because everyone has an opinion on education, he is often the subject of editorials, both laudatory and critical. Yet Joel could not love his work more. Sometimes I ask myself, what am I doing here? I could be eating a very nice, civilized lunch in a corporate dining room right now. And instead, I'm in a high-crime school trying to get staff to work together to enforce our discipline code, Joel once told me. But I grew up in public housing in Queens, and I'm a product of inner-city New York public schools. I owe a lot to the principals and teachers who invested their lives in the system and changed my life and the vision of my opportunities. I'm lucky enough to be in a position to give something back. I don't want to sound pompous, but this work feels more important than anything I've ever done. On a much smaller scale, I know what he means about a job feeling meaningful. My work always felt really significant, even when, in retrospect, it was hardly that. I'll never forget when I was a teaching assistant at the University of Illinois, and I was asked to present my PhD thesis on dropwise condensation to an international conference on heat transfer that was being held in Boulder, Colorado. You would have thought I was in the running for the Nobel Prize. I was a nervous wreck before my lecture and practiced for weeks. When the big day arrived, I spoke and received the polite applause I deserved. That didn't stop me from rushing to the phone to call my mother in a state of complete exhilaration. To tell you the truth, I still remember the excitement of that day. Luckily, finding a job that touches your core is not hard. Such jobs are everywhere. Every piece of work has the potential, since it only has to feel important to you. Shortly after I retired from GE, we were in Montreal, eating dinner at a small French restaurant, where we fell into conversation with a fellow tourist. Within a few minutes, we learned that this fellow was the first mercury-free dentist in Quechee, Vermont. You could feel the pride bursting out of his chest. Now, I didn't want to suddenly start a second career as a dentist, but his enthusiasm sure was infectious. As I said before, every job has its ups and downs, but if a job doesn't excite you on some level, just because of the stuff of it, don't settle. And don't worry either about knowing when you find a job with meaning. You'll feel it. Now let's look at those special cases I mentioned at the beginning. The job fit signals can be applied across pretty much all job situations, but some special cases call for more specific discussion. The first is finding your first real job. For a few lucky people, this process is relatively straightforward. They've got great grades from a quality school and some impressive work experience along the way. These new graduates out of college or recent MBAs usually have plenty of options. And I hope the signals in this chapter will be helpful in choosing wisely. Many people, however, do not get their pick of first job assignments. Their school record is only okay. Their job experience is not particularly special. That puts them in a position where they have to sell themselves to an audience that ranges from skeptical to downright negative. If you're in that category, my strong advice is just be real and come clean. There is nothing less appealing than an applicant with a so-so record overselling himself with a lot of bravado or over-eagerness. It's just so phony, and experienced managers can smell the fakery a mile away. The best thing you can do is tell your true story. Okay, I know my grades aren't that great, you might say. I spent a lot of time playing intramural sports, and to be honest, a lot of time with my friends. I definitely could have studied more, but I had other priorities, which probably weren't the best ones. The reason you should still hire me is because I never give up on a challenge. I work hard, I believe in your product, and I admire your company, and I know I can contribute here. While you're telling your true story, act like your true self. If you are generally outspoken and funny, don't act stiff and serious during your interviews. If you are a nerd, don't try to act slick. The company should know what it's getting, and you should show them, so you see how they react. I know of an MBA who tripped over a door jamb on her way into an interview with 3 executives at a prestigious consulting firm. After scrambling back to her feet, she shook hands with her interviewers saying, "And I'm Grace, the ballet teacher." None of them cracked a smile, nor did they try to put her at ease after what was obviously an embarrassing moment. She ended up being offered the job she declined. They saw the real me, and I saw the real them, she recalls. My main point is, when going after your first job, live in your own skin and be comfortable there. Authenticity may be the best selling point you've got. The second special job situation is when you are stuck in a position and see no way out. There are a slew of ways to get stuck in a job. There is nowhere to move up, since your boss isn't going anywhere, and he has no interest in pushing you for a job in another division. You've been passed over for a promotion, and you've been told you're fine where you are, but you're not moving on anytime soon. Or your company promotes people only after a certain period of time, which is a long way off. You love your job, but the money's bad. Or the money's great, but your job is lousy. The list alone could make you want to scream. And that's the problem with being stuck. Frustration builds and builds until people generally do something stupid. They quit. Don't do that. It's much, much easier to get a job from a job. I would even go further and say, not only should you stay put, you should work harder. Nothing will get you a new job faster than terrific performance in your old one. Jerry Roach, senior chairman of Heidrick & Struggles and one of the most respected headhunters in the United States, says that even if you feel stuck, if you're performing well, 2 outside observers are likely to know: headhunters and competitors. Great performers are like the masts of the tall ships, Jerry said to me recently. We can see them over the horizon, and we're always trying to bring them in to our port. By contrast, the worst kind of job seekers are those Jerry called perennials. These types are never moving up fast enough, or they can't stand their jobs, so they're always out there with their resumes and their phone calls, hounding us or hounding companies to hire them, he said. These people pretty quickly get themselves labeled. Obviously, if you're stuck, you need to put feelers out there to let people know you're thinking of moving. Just don't make it your purpose in life, or you'll undermine your effort, and worse, you'll take your eye off your best hope for getting unstuck, your performance. The third special case is finding a job after you've been let go. Last year I had lunch with a former GE executive. Let's call him Charlie, who had once worked for me in a staff position before moving into operations. After several promotions, he landed in a job where he struggled for a couple of years to meet his numbers. Finally, in his early 50s, he was let go. Charlie's career, however, hardly ended. After a few months, he became a partner at a high-technology company, starting part-time and quickly being drawn into a full-time role. From there, he was asked to join several corporate boards, and he also started teaching at a well-known business school. 5 years after being let go, he told me, his work was more fulfilling than ever. I asked him how he'd come back so strong. Listen, I screwed up, he said. My boss and I had agreed to clear-cut objectives, and I missed them. I waited too long to let go of 2 direct reports who weren't delivering. I didn't take costs out fast enough when the downturn was approaching. I was just too optimistic. I told my wife I was going to get it, and I did. Charlie's rational response floored me, because usually after people have been let go, they become very defensive and depressed. Both conditions, albeit natural and common, are what kill you when you go out to get a job again. An employer can pick up low self-esteem across the room, and people want to hire winners. But how do you act like a winner when you feel like a loser? I asked Charlie that question. His approach, he said, was to draw on what he called his reservoir of self-confidence, his strong family, and his store of positive feelings about himself and his achievements in the past. He used that internal capital to stay connected with business colleagues and to network for new opportunities. He also used it to stay active socially and in community activities. At first, maybe people were looking at me differently and talking about me because I wasn't working anymore, Charlie said. I tried not to pay attention to that. The goal, if you've been let go, is to stay out of what I have always referred to as the vortex of defeat, in which you let yourself spiral into inertia and despair. One reason why people often get sucked into the vortex is that they wait too long before they start looking for another job. This is a tricky matter. It makes a lot of sense to take some time off after you are let go, say a month or two, to reflect and compose yourself. On the other hand, the more you wait, the more likely you are to start doubting yourself, and the more likely it is that prospective employers will think something is wrong. You just don't want any hole in your resume to be too gaping. Prospective employers will, of course, ask you about why you left your last job. Come right out and say you were asked to move on. Every manager in the world knows what "I resigned" or "I left for personal reasons" really means. Just as important, take responsibility for your departure, like my friend Charlie did in our conversation. His ownership of the situation made him infinitely more appealing than the typical kind of defense I heard 100 times. Oh, my boss was really difficult. Or they don't care about customers as much as I do. Or my favorite, it was all politics there. It never mattered what you did. All that mattered was who you knew. Compare that to Charlie's approach, even recognizing that he is on the far end of rationality. When he got back into the job market, he didn't blame a soul but himself. He told interviewers what he learned from the experience and what he would do differently in his next job. I'm determined to be more externally focused from now on, he said, and I will definitely move faster on underperforming people. One of my objectives is to prove I don't make the same mistakes twice. If you've been let go, you never want to present yourself with a swagger, but you do need to project realism and optimism. Draw on your reservoir of confidence. Say what happened. Say what you've learned. And never be afraid to ask, just give me a chance. Someone will. Due to my vintage, I belong to a very small club. People who have spent their whole careers at one company. When I got my degree from graduate school in 1961, that was the norm. Today's statistics show that college graduates change companies multiple times in their first decade out, and newly minted MBAs do the same. I can't say if that's good or bad. It just is. People are very hungry to hurry up and find the right job. Here are some thoughts, though. First, finding the right job takes time and experimentation and patience. After all, you have to work at something for a while before you know if you can even do it, let alone if it feels right. Second, finding the right job gets easier and easier the better you are. Maybe that sounds harsh, but it's just reality. At the end of the day, talented people have their pick of opportunities. The right jobs find them. So if you really want to find a great job, choose something you love to do. Make sure you're with people you like, and then give it your all. If you do that, you're sure to have a great job, and you'll never really work another day in your life. The previous chapter of this book was about finding your right job. This chapter is about getting your next one. Now, not everyone in business wants to get a bigger and better job, but a lot of people do. If you're among them, this chapter is for you, whether you are hungry for your first promotion or your fifth. I was there once. When I started my career at age 24, I had no idea where I was going or how I was going to get there, but I was filled with ambition. The drive to, quote, make something of myself had started pretty young. I had my first job at age 10 as a caddy at a country club near my hometown of Salem, Massachusetts. Through high school and college, I held one job after another, from bartender to teaching assistant. By the time I graduated from the University of Illinois with a PhD in chemical engineering in 1961, I was eager for the real thing. The job GE offered me seemed like a good deal. I'd be working in the lab developing a new plastic, and if it succeeded, I saw a chance to get out in the field and sell it. Best of all, the job was in Massachusetts, and it paid the most of any offer, $10,500. Believe me, I wasn't thinking about a career at that point. If I had, I would have surely taken the offer I had received from Exxon, where a chemical engineering degree really meant something. But forget it. Exxon was in Texas. At that point in my life, the fact that I had gone to school in Illinois already made me feel like I had traveled halfway around the world. Over the next 13 years at GE, I got 4 promotions. Each one felt terrific. I liked having more responsibility, making bigger deals, building bigger plants, and managing more people. It was really only in 1973 that it dawned on me that I had a shot at the company's top job, and that I wanted it too. In an act of complete cockiness, I put that down in my performance evaluation under the question about career goals. 8 years later, I got my wish. So how did that happen? How does a person get promoted? The first answer is luck. All careers, no matter how scripted they appear, are shaped by some element of pure chance. Sometimes a person just happens to be in the right place at the right time, and he meets someone at an airport or party, for instance, and a career door swings open. We've all heard stories like that. Sometimes we don't even know luck is good until well after the fact. An old golfing friend of mine, Perry Ruddock, remembers being sorely disappointed when he was passed over for a promotion that was in France early in his career at the investment bank Smith Barney. He thought he had missed out on his best shot at making a name for himself in the company, not to mention the glamour of Paris in 1966. As luck would have it, 2 years after Perry would have left for the assignment abroad, another position at the company came open in New York, and he got it. In his new role, Perry, then 32, got to run the company's investment banking operations, and with a team of forward-thinking young bankers, he helped guide the company successfully through a challenging period of consolidation in the industry. To make a long story short, Perry was vice chairman of Smith Barney from 1985 until his retirement in 1991. But luck can also break the other way. Sometimes careers stall for no reason at all except bad timing. At the very least, careers can zig and zag for reasons beyond your control, like an acquisition, or divestiture, or a new boss with very different ideas about your future. Occasionally, you miss out on a promotion because of office politics or nepotism. Such setbacks can be terribly disheartening, enough to make you ask yourself, why the heck should I even try? Don't go there. In the long run, luck plays a smaller role in your career than the factors that are within your control. While I never sorted these factors out while I was working, I have thought a lot more about them lately because audiences ask so many career questions. They come in every variety. I like my staff job at headquarters, but I want to move into operations. What do I need to do to convince my boss I can make the change? Or, I don't have any chemistry with my mentor, but she's really important in my company. How can I get ahead when I don't have somebody pulling for me? Or I'm in manufacturing, but I want to move into marketing. Will I ever get out of the factory? Career concerns, incidentally, are not confined to any one country or any type of industry. In China, with its nascent market economy and egalitarian culture, business people are fiercely curious when they ask, what does it take to get ahead? And the same question has come at me in Portugal, France, Denmark, and even Slovakia, where capitalism is less than 15 years old. I think the same answer applies everywhere. Basically, getting promoted takes one do and one don't. Do deliver sensational performance, far beyond expectations, and at every opportunity, expand your job beyond its official boundaries. And don't make your boss use political capital in order to champion you. These imperatives are not everything, of course. There are 4 other do's and 1 other don't, and we'll look at them in turn. But first, let's focus on the 2 big ones. When most people think about delivering sensational performance, they imagine beating agreed-upon performance goals. That's all well and good. But an even more effective way to get promoted is to expand your job's horizons to include bold and unexpected activities. Come up with a new concept or process that doesn't improve just your results, but your unit's results and the company's overall performance. Change your job in a way that makes people around you work better and your boss look smarter. Don't just do the predictable. I learned this lesson for myself my first year at GE while I was still working in the laboratory developing a new plastic called PPO. A vice president was coming to town, and my boss asked me to give him an update on our progress. Eager to impress both of them, I stayed late at work for a week, analyzing not only the economics of PPO, but of all the other engineering plastics in the industry. My final report included a 5-year outlook comparing the costs of products made by DuPont, Celanese, and Monsanto, and outlined a clear route to a competitive advantage for GE. My boss and the vice president were surprised, to put it mildly, and their incredibly positive response showed me the impact of giving people more than they expect. I would see this dynamic again and again over the next 40 years. Take the case of John Krenicki, who made everyone around and above him look better by expanding his job's horizons. GE sent John to Europe to manage its $100 million silicones business in 1997. It was by no means a plum assignment, but it gave John a chance to run his own show. The business, while number 2 globally, was a weak number 6 in the European market, mainly because its biggest cost, raw materials, had to be sourced from the United States. It just could not compete with the local players. Back at headquarters, everyone would have been happy if John had grown silicones by 8 to 10% a year by pulling the usual levers: on-time delivery to existing customers, finding new ones, and developing new products. But John had bigger ideas. He proposed building a new plant in Europe to produce his key raw material. The price tag was well over $100 million. We said, no way. But John couldn't accept that there wasn't a solution to his cost spine. He tried a long-shot approach. Expanding his job's horizons, he entered into talks with several European competitors in search of a partner who would bring local sourcing and technology expertise to the table in return for GE's global strength. After a long year of negotiations, John found what he needed: a silicone joint venture with the German company Bayer, with GE holding a majority stake in the new company. I recently asked him about this experience. It was just persistence, I guess, he said. I knew we had to become self-sufficient somehow. If we had just kept doing things as usual, even if we grew the business by a reasonable amount, we never would have broken out. Today, the European silicones business is number 2 in the local market, and with a recent acquisition, its sales are more than $700 million. As for John, he was promoted in 1998 to CEO of GE Transportation, and in 2003 to CEO of GE's $8 billion plastics business. If exceeding expectations is the most reliable way to get ahead, the most reliable way to sabotage yourself is to be a thorn in your organization's rear end. Of course, no one sets out to do that, but it happens. And every time it does, you force your boss to use his political capital in order to defend you. At this point, probably most people are thinking, who, me? Make my boss use his political capital? Never. Well, think again. You can have the greatest results in the world, but if you don't live your company's values and behaviors, you run the risk of this happening. Take the case of an extremely smart and capable employee I'll call James. We hired James into our business development program at headquarters. This 2-year up or out program was designed for MBAs who had been with consulting firms for 3 or 4 years and wanted to get off that track and into operations. To test them, we put them in short, intense field assignments, transferring GE's best practices from business to business. In most cases, one of our businesses would steal these MBAs from the program within a year and place them in meaningful operating positions. James was about 32 when we brought him in from a top-tier consulting firm where he had worked since graduating from business school. He was European, articulate, and as I said, very bright, with excellent experience consulting in several industries. We figured at least 3 GE businesses would be fighting over him within 6 months. A year came and went, and no one would touch him. I couldn't figure out why until I sat in on his first performance review with his boss and the HR team. There I learned that James came into the office at 10 or 11 each day and left late, at 8 p.m. or so. Those were plenty of hours to put in, and that kind of schedule was fine for an individual contributor. We had people in R&D who liked to work at night, for instance, and people in sales who came and went according to the needs of their customers in 3 time zones. James's hours, however, were not going to make it in a company where line managers generally showed up at 8 a.m. or earlier, and every meeting and work routine revolved around that. But James didn't seem to care about GE's routines. He had his own way of doing things. I saw that dynamic up close when James called my assistant and asked for an appointment. When we got together, after a few minutes of chit-chat about his career, the real reason for his visit became clear. Would it be okay, he asked, if I flew my own plane to my meetings in the field? I told him he was nuts. Do that only if you want to piss everyone off, I said. Your hours have already gotten you in enough trouble. That kind of showing off is going to kill you around here. It's not our culture. But I'd pay for the gas. This is not about the gas, I said. Despite James's disconnect with our values, he did land a job in operations. Because of his brainpower, energy, and European background, I put him in charge of a relatively small, troubled business we had acquired in Europe. 2 American transplants hadn't worked out. Putting James there was a classic corporate stuff job, in that I stuffed him, despite my misgivings, down the throat of the business. It didn't work. GE's European business culture wasn't any more amenable to James than its American one, and eventually he had to leave the company. In the end, there wasn't a person left with any desire to spend political capital on him. By contrast, take the story of Kevin Scherer, who started in the same business development program as James. Before joining GE, Kevin had received a degree in aeronautical engineering from the U.S. Naval Academy, served a 4-year stint on nuclear attack submarines, and worked for 2 years at McKinsey & Company. Without question, he was as smart as James in terms of IQ. He was also industrious and, like James, ambitious, the latter of those traits mitigated by his maturity. Kevin knew that GE valued teamwork. He was the ultimate team player. He showed up early, worked incredibly hard, and never looked for personal credit. Kevin worked in business development for 2 years and spent the next 3 years in operations. By that time, he was so universally respected, we made a huge bet on him by offering him a position as one of the company's 100 vice presidents, running its marine and industrial turbine business. Unfortunately, the same day that we tried to promote him, Kevin told us he had decided to leave for a huge opportunity at MCI. We tried desperately to keep him, but he was determined to run his own show. He left MCI a few years later to become COO of Amgen, and in 2000 was appointed its CEO. In the years since Kevin joined Amgen, the company's market capitalization has grown from $7 billion to $84 billion. It was obvious from the beginning that Kevin was a star. He had everything going for him, starting with performance, and you can be sure no one ever had to expend a drop of political capital when they mentioned his name. No wonder his career has consisted of one promotion after another. Along with transgressing company values, there is a related but more egregious way that you can use up your boss's political capital. It has to do with character. That is, with the kinds of behaviors that can make people ask, hold on, can I really trust this person? Take lack of candor. As I mentioned earlier in the chapter on candor, I'm not talking about bold-faced lying, but a tendency to withhold information. That behavior is far more common, and it frustrates bosses and teams to no end. We had a manager in one of our larger businesses whose results were quite good. But after several early promotions, his career hit a wall. The reason was, whenever he was in a business review or a deal proposal session, we had to pepper him with about 30 questions to get him to explain what was really going on. And even then, we didn't feel as if we were getting the whole story. All we got was hemming and hawing, and then a hesitant, "It's okay now," or a cagey sounding, "We've got it under control." At every HR review, I would ask his boss why this guy played his cards so close to the vest. "It's his personality," was the answer. "He's not a bad person. He just doesn't like to open up." "What's he hiding?" I asked, because when he withholds information the way he does, he just comes across as if he's not telling the truth. And I know I'm not the only one who feels that way. "Yeah, that's true. It bugs other people too. But he's not lying. He's just got it. But we've got to talk about the business more openly." "Yeah, I know, it's frustrating. I'll tell him again." And back and forth like that. Eventually, his boss got tired of the routine, and soon thereafter, the 2KG manager was demoted. The point is, don't make your boss ask the perfect question to get information from you. If you want your character to stand up for you and make life easier for your boss, open up and tell it like it is. There's another behavior that will also force your boss to use political capital because it really alienates people. It's wearing your career goals on your sleeve. With most people, ambition is a positive thing. It's fire in the belly. It's energy and optimism. It's pushing yourself and the organization forward so that everyone wins. Kevin Scherer had plenty of this kind of drive, and so do most people who succeed. Career lust looks different. It shows itself in tearing down the people around you, insulting or disparaging them in order to make your own candle burn brighter, as the old saying goes. It's covering up your mistakes, or worse, trying to blame them on someone else. It's hogging meetings. It's taking disproportionate credit for team success and gossiping incessantly about people and events in the office. It's seeing the company's organization chart as a chessboard and making an open display of watching the pieces move. If you've got this problem, your best hope is to repress it, fight it, and keep it out of sight. If you don't do that, when the time comes to be promoted, there won't be enough political capital in the world to save you. It's very hard to champion someone over the clamor of objecting coworkers. We've just looked at the two biggest factors in getting you promoted: getting great results while expanding your job's horizons, and not using up your boss's political capital. That said, there are 4 other do's that certainly help too, and 1 don't. The do's are: manage your relationships with your subordinates with the same carefulness that you manage the one with your boss. Get on the radar screen by being an early champion of your company's major projects or initiatives. Search out and relish the input of lots of mentors, realizing that mentors don't always look like mentors. Have a positive attitude and spread it around. The don't is, don't let setbacks break your stride. Let's look at the do's first. Every business advice book tells you to network with people within your company and industry. They tell you how important it is to build a mutually respectful bond with your boss. That's all good advice, and you should take it. But to get ahead, you also need to tend to your subordinates with the same level of attention and concern. The boss-subordinate relationship is easy to neglect. Your boss is in your face, and your peers are on your mind, while your subordinates generally do what you say. But be careful. because the boss-subordinate relationship can easily fall into two career-damaging traps. The first, and by far more common, occurs when you spend too much time managing up. As a result, you become too remote from your subordinates, and you end up losing their support and affection. The second occurs when you get too close to your employees, overstepping boundaries, and end up acting more like a buddy than a boss. Either way can catch up with you. Your goal in managing your relationships with subordinates is to try to walk the line between the two extremes. When the time comes for your promotion, the best thing employees can say about you is that you were fair, you cared, and you showed them tough love. I learned this lesson firsthand. In the final showdown for CEO of GE, I was strongly opposed by two powerful vice chairmen who supported their own candidates. Unbeknownst to me, I was really helped by my direct reports. I found out that they had advocated relentlessly for my promotion with Chairman Reg Jones, telling him I was tough but fair and that I would push GE harder and faster than any of the other CEO finalists. I'm not sure all of them liked me. I was rough around the edges and pretty short on patience. But I guess they respected me for respecting them and building relationships with them, not just when I needed them, but years before. Another way to help yourselves with promotions is to get on the radar screen. As I've said, the first and best way to get noticed is with results. But you can also raise your visibility by putting your hand up when the call comes for people to lead major projects and initiatives, in particular ones that don't have a whole lot of popularity at the outset. At GE, two of those were globalization, which we launched in earnest in the 1980s, and Six Sigma, which was launched in 1995. Wayne Hewitt is a perfect example of a person whose career benefited from this dynamic. Wayne was a 35-year-old manager when he took over a Six Sigma program in plastics after running GE Plastics Pacific. Using Six Sigma, he and his team drastically reduced product variation and stretched plant capacity 30% with little additional investment. 3 years later, Wayne was promoted to the CEO of GE's $2 billion silicone business. Dan Henson is another case in point. Dan was running a GE Capital lending business in London when he had the courage to volunteer to spearhead Six Sigma throughout GE Capital, a business where a lot of people doubted it had any value. Dan found out exactly where Six Sigma applied and, equally important, where it did not. In 2 years, Dan achieved variation reduction in highly repetitive activities such as credit card processing and mortgage insurance applications, and the results were impressive. Today, Dan is CEO of one of GE Capital's largest businesses, Vendor Financial Services. GE is so big. If Wayne and Dan hadn't put themselves on the radar screen, who knows when they would have been made CEOs. Certainly, it would have happened eventually, but not nearly as quickly. The best proof of the radar screen dynamic is in the numbers. Today, more than half of the senior vice presidents reporting to Jeff Immelt have worked in global assignments, and 1/3 of the company's approximately 180 offices have significant Six Sigma experience. The third career do concerns mentors, a burning topic while I was at GE, and these days, wherever I speak. People, it seems, are always looking for that one right mentor to get them ahead. But in my experience, there is no one right mentor. There are many right mentors. I had dozens of informal mentors over the course of my career, and each one taught me something important. My mentors ranged from the classic older and wiser executive, to co-workers who were often younger than I was. Some mentoring relationships lasted a lifetime. Others lasted just weeks. One of the most meaningful mentors in my life never called himself my mentor, nor did I ever identify him that way. I thought of Cy Cathcart, who was 10 years my senior and a member of the GE board, as my friend. To my great sadness, he died in 2002. Cy was everything people look for in a great mentor, a person who cheered me on and challenged me in equal measure. His judgment about people was pitch perfect, and I rarely made a big decision on hiring without running it by him first. During the toughest period of my career, when I was choosing a successor to recommend to the board, Cy spent several hundred hours over the course of 5 years visiting all of the candidates and sharing his impressions with me. Cy, the longtime chairman of Illinois Tool Works, was on the GE board when I became CEO. We played golf as often as we could and chatted on the phone regularly. Cy used both these venues to push my thinking up unseen alleys and around blind corners. "Are you sure that guy's not a phony?" he would ask. "Do you think that acquisition is still going to make you happy in a year when the fanfare dies down?" He always had the right question. I had another great mentor in Dennis Dammerman, who was not only younger than me by 10 years, but my subordinate as well. I met Dennis in 1977, when I was named head of GE's Consumer Products Group. I arrived in the job knowing basically nothing about insurance or financing, the main activities of GE Capital, one of the group's businesses. Dennis, whom I had hired as my financial analyst, had spent several years there. For months on end, Dennis taught me something every single day. His patience was remarkable. Here was his boss asking him to define the simplest concepts. I barely understood types of debt in those days. After all, I had come from the manufacturing side of GE. When we wanted money, all we did was make a pitch to corporate, and if the proposal was good enough, they sent it. Suddenly I was dealing with combined ratios, delinquencies, leveraged leases, and the like. Dennis basically downloaded his brain into mine. He never called himself my mentor, but he was nothing less. There were countless other mentors who helped me in my career, from the executive education teacher who tried to teach me public speaking when I was 26, to the young woman in PR who tried to teach me the internet when I was 60. But let me just add to the list one more mentor that can work for everyone: the business media. Business is like any game. It has players, a language, a complex history, rules, controversies, and a rhythm. The media covers it all, and from every angle. From my earliest days in plastics, I learned mountains about business just by reading every financial newspaper and magazine I could get my hands on. From them, I picked up what deals worked and which failed and why. I followed people's careers. I tried to understand what kinds of strategic moves were criticized and which were praised. I kept up with different industries, from chemicals to medical technology. And I used what I read. I learned, for instance, about Pepsi's executive training program from an article in Fortune magazine. I was so impressed by the Pepsi model, which used the company's own executives as teachers, that I built it into the foundation of our training program in Crotonville. I don't believe everything I read, of course, and the more I knew, the more I realized that some articles were off the mark in their analysis. Regardless, I still believe the business media is such a good teacher that I am always amazed when I meet a young person who doesn't just consume it. Don't let that happen. This mentor is right there for the taking. My point is that mentors are everywhere. Don't settle for the mentor assigned to you as part of a formal program. Those official mentors teach you the company ropes, but they're just a start. The best mentors help you in unplanned, unscripted ways. Relish all that they give you in whatever form they come. The fourth and final way to help yourself get promoted is as hard or easy as you make it. Have a positive attitude and spread it around. Yes, it's nothing more sophisticated than that. Have a sense of humor, be fun to hang out with, don't be a bore or a sourpuss, don't act important or worse, pompous. Smack yourself in the head if you start taking yourself too seriously. In politics, people talk about each candidate's likability factor, which is just another way of saying personality appeal. Both of these terms refer to something intangible, but they really matter in politics and at work. Obviously, being a congenial, upbeat person will not get you ahead by itself. You need everything else we've just talked about. Great results, expanded job horizons, good character, visibility, mentors, and all the rest. But it is very, very hard to get ahead without being a positive person, because very simply, no one likes to work under or near a dark cloud, even if the cloud is very smart. I know it's not easy to be always upbeat. Life doesn't always go your way. But every time you feel yourself spreading gloom at work, think of Jimmy Dunn. Jimmy was a senior executive at Sandler O'Neill and Partners, the investment banking firm that was located on the 104th floor of the World Trade Center's South Tower. On September 11th, 68 of the staff's 177 employees were killed, including the company's founder, Herman Sandler, and its lead partner, Chris Quackenbush. Overnight, Jimmy became the CEO of a company that was literally and emotionally decimated. Jimmy was, of course, grief-stricken by the firm's incalculable human tragedy and distraught over the deaths of two of his closest friends, Herman and Chris. But today he will tell you that he knew one thing would prevent the firm from shutting down and the disaster worsening: a can-do attitude. All I did after 9/11 was walk around, consoling people, talking about how we're going to survive and rebuild, he said recently. As he hired to replace Sandler O'Neill's lost employees, Jimmy looked for people who were upbeat, positive, and as undaunted as humanly possible by 9/11. Skill mattered a lot. Outlook mattered more. Success, Jimmy says, is so much about attitude. A positive attitude does not always come easy. And in cases like Jimmy Dunn's, after 9/11, it comes unimaginably hard. If it's natural for you, fantastic. If it isn't, fight hard to find it and wear it all over yourself. You can win without being upbeat if every other star is aligned. But why would you want to try? We've gone through the do's. Now let's look at the final don't. It concerns setbacks. Once or twice, or more times than that, you will not get promoted. Don't let it break your stride. Of course you'll feel terrible, maybe even bitter and angry. But work like hell to let those feelings go. First, and by all means, do not turn your career setback into the office cause celeb. What a way to alienate everyone: your boss, co-workers, and subordinates. If you want to complain about your career, do it at home, at a bar across town, or wherever you go to worship. The people at work while they know a lot about your case, should not be drawn into your emotional experience. More important, even if you are thinking of leaving your company, try to accept your setback with as much grace as you can muster, and even see it as a challenge to prove yourself anew. Such an approach will serve you well, whether you stay or go. No one makes this point better than Mark Little. Mark was the quiet, self-confident, well-liked engineering vice president of GE's Power Systems when in 1995 the business ran into serious quality problems. As Mark puts it, I had just gotten the job and basically turbine blades were cracking all over the world. It was a mess. Mark worked hard to get the business back on track, but when Bob Nardelli was promoted to run the entire Power Systems group, he decided Mark had neither the sense of urgency nor the engineering expertise for the job. He split the business and gave Mark engineering responsibility for just steam turbines, the much smaller and less important piece. Suddenly, Mark was in charge of 1/3 as many people and a product considered to be old, dull, and slow growth. It felt like the end of the world, Mark said to me recently. I thought it was unfair, and I was mad as hell. I felt like I hadn't created the problem, and I had done everything I could to fix it. Then I was punched in the stomach. I was angry and hurt, and I had to believe it was the end of my GE career. But Mark did an amazing thing. He stuck his chin out and got back to work. I just figured I was going to prove everyone wrong, he said. I wanted to show the whole world what we could do. Over the next couple of years, Mark energized his team to revitalize the steam turbine product line. He introduced new technologies and put in process discipline, driving costs down to new levels. I made up my mind that I was not going to show my people that I was mad and hurt. I was going to go in there every day and do what was best for me and my people and for GE, and that was to refocus the business. In 1997, Mark's results were so terrific and his self-confidence so restored that when the much larger position of product manager for all turbines came open, he approached Bob Nardelli and asked for the job. The answer was yes. I'd say the main reason I got the promotion was because I surprised everybody with my results, my attitude, and my perseverance. I just never gave up. Today, Mark is the product manager, not only for the turbine business, but for GE's hydro and wind businesses as well, a $14 billion enterprise. Now, in summarizing, to get ahead, you have to want to get ahead. Some promotions come because of luck, but very few. The facts are, when it comes to careers, you mainly make your own luck. You will likely change companies, maybe even professions, more than a few times over the course of your working life. But there are some things you can do to keep moving ahead. Exceed expectations, broaden your job's horizons, and never give your boss a reason to have to spend capital for you. Manage your subordinates carefully. Sign up for radar screen assignments. Collect mentors and spread your positive attitude. When setbacks come, and they will, ride them out with your head up. That may sound like a lot of stuff to do, but there are no real shortcuts. Along the journey, you won't get every promotion you want when you want it. But if you take the long way, eventually, and sometimes sooner than you expect, you'll reach your destination. The third chapter in the career section is called Hard Spots, with the subtitle, That Damn Boss. I've never known a person who didn't light up at the memory of a truly great boss. and for good reason. Great bosses can be friends, teachers, coaches, allies, and sources of inspiration all in one. They can shape and advance your career in ways you never expected, and sometimes they can even change your life. In stark contrast, a bad boss can just about kill you. Not literally, of course, but a bad boss can kill that part of your soul where positive energy, commitment, and hope come from. On a daily basis, a bad boss can leave you feeling angry, hurt, and bitter, even physically ill. If you're like most people, over the course of a 40-something year career, you will have a handful of great bosses, many more that are pretty good, and one or two total jerks. People who are so consistently awful, they make you want to throw it in and quit. Bad bosses come in every variety. Some grab all the credit, some are incompetent, some kiss up but kick down, others bully and humiliate, have mood swings, withhold praise and money, break promises, or play favorites. Occasionally, there are bad bosses who display several of these characteristics all at once. How do these people ever get ahead? Well, sometimes they happen to be very talented. They deliver the numbers, or they're extremely creative. They can have shrewd political alliances, or maybe even a family member in high places. Bad bosses, incidentally, tend to have longer lives in some industries rather than others. On the creative side, very talented writers, artists, and producers who get promoted to run projects are often given a pass on bad behavior because they are, quote, geniuses. Wall Street is also often a safe harbor for bad bosses. Top moneymakers are often thought of as irreplaceable, and they know it, making some of them even more insufferable. But never mind industry specifics. The world has jerks. Some of them get to be bosses. This chapter is about what to do when one of them gets to be your boss. Now, this chapter won't provide any hard and fast answers because each bad boss situation is unique. But it will walk you through a series of questions that hopefully will surface the right approach to your bad boss situation. Right in the sense that it fits your goals in life and at work. Before we look at those questions, though, let me state the overriding principle behind this chapter. In any bad boss situation, you cannot let yourself be a victim. That theme has come up before in this book, most recently in the chapter on mergers and acquisitions, and for many of the same reasons, it applies here too. I realize that a bad boss, like a merger, may make you want to bitch and moan to your coworkers, whine to your family, punch a wall, or watch too much TV with a drink in your hand. He may make you want to surf the web or call headhunters looking for jobs anywhere but where you are. All in all, he may end up making you want to feel very sorry for yourself. Just don't. In any business situation, seeing yourself as a victim is completely self-defeating. And when it comes to your career, it's an attitude that kills all your options. It can even be the start of a career death spiral. I have a friend, a financial analyst at a Wall Street firm, who bounced from one crummy job to another after he had a falling out with his bad boss and quit in a huff. Out in the market, with no recommendations, all he had was an I was screwed story of woe to tell prospective employers. Ultimately, 5 years later, he ended up with the same job he had started from, only at a less respected firm and at about 60% of the pay. Obviously, you shouldn't always stay with a bad boss. Sometimes you need to get out. Regardless of your decision, avoid the pervasive victim mentality. You know what I mean. We live in a culture where parents sue fast food restaurants for making their kids fat, and cities spend millions of dollars a year to settle claims for injuries caused by uneven sidewalks and potholes. Please, like every other unfortunate or unfair event that befalls you in life, working for a difficult boss is your problem and you must solve it. To do that, ask yourself the following series of questions. The answers will help you navigate what is undeniably a painful situation. Painful, but again, yours to accept, fix, or end. The first question is, why is my boss acting like a jerk? Sometimes the answer to this question is a no-brainer. Your boss is acting like a jerk because that's the way he is. He may be fine with customers and fairly reasonable with his own bosses and peers, but he treats everyone below him with the same kind of bad behavior, be it in the form of intimidation, belligerence, arrogance, neglect, secrecy, or sarcasm. It is an entirely different situation if your boss is just impossible toward you. In that case, you need to start asking yourself what you have done to draw his disapproval. That's right. You need to ask yourself if you are the cause of your boss's bad behavior. Generally speaking, bosses are not awful to people whom they like, respect, and need. If your boss is being negative to you, and mainly you, you can feel pretty confident that he has his version of events, and his version concerns your attitude or performance. You've got to find out what's going on. Start by asking yourself that question, but know that self-assessment is difficult, to put it mildly. Even with a huge amount of maturity and a cast-iron stomach, it's hard to see yourself as others do. I know of an HR executive at a training center in the South who spent 10 years administering 360-degree feedback programs and then delivering the conclusions to the individual being evaluated. 7 out of 10 people are completely stunned by what they hear, she said. When they get their feedback, they think I've mixed up the forms. They are convinced their colleagues must be talking about someone else. The problem, the HR executive said, is that people generally overrate their performance on the job and their popularity with the team, most often by a factor of 2 or more. Know that, then, as you conduct what is an admittedly difficult mirror test. Think hard about your performance and press yourself for the ways you may have fallen short. Think about why your colleagues might not consider you a team player. In a state of forced self-loathing, gauge your personal productivity, your face time in the office, your contribution to sales and earnings. Maybe you open a lot of deals, but never close them. Maybe you close a lot of deals, but boast too much. Maybe people weren't really okay with it when you blew a big account a few months back. Finally, face into your attitude about authority, because it just might be that the source of your problem with your boss is that you are, at your core, a boss hater. Boss haters are a real breed. It doesn't make any difference whom these people work for. They go into any authority relationship with barely repressed cynicism. Who knows why? Upbringing, experiences at work or home, political bent, it doesn't really matter. Boss haters usually exude constant, low-level negativity toward the system. And when they do, their bosses feel it, and they return the favor. I'll never forget a group of boss haters we had at GE headquarters in Fairfield, Connecticut. A half dozen or so guys who ate lunch together in the cafeteria every day. They labeled themselves the Table of Lost Dreams. Each of these employees was very talented. One had a real knack for turning just the right phrase. He had a background in journalism and worked in PR. Fortunately, the media found his cynicism appealing. Another was a labor relations specialist who had a real affinity for the unions. His natural sympathies made him enormously effective in frontline negotiations. All of the guys at the table of lost dreams were very good at their jobs, and none of them managed anyone, so their defiance of conditions at the company was pretty much left alone. I wrote them off as harmless but effective curmudgeons who would have hated any work situation. But tolerance is not usually what happens in these cases. Most of the time, leaders get sick of the undercurrent of whining and the energy-sapping effects of boss haters and manage them out by showing them just what a bad boss really looks like. Maybe this all sounds very unfamiliar to you. You're basically comfortable with authority, and the rest of your self-examination has you coming up empty-handed too. Now what? It's time to find out what your boss is thinking. Any kind of confrontation, however, is incredibly risky. Your boss may be waiting for just such a moment to dump you. In fact, he may have been hoping his negative vibes would eventually inch you into his office with the question, "So what am I doing wrong?" so that he can answer, "Too much for this to go on any longer." Still, you have to talk. There's no way around it. Just remember, before you go into that meeting, be prepared and have options in the event that you come out of it unemployed. Then go do it. Don't be defensive. Remember, your goal is to uncover something your boss has not been able to explicitly tell you for whatever reason. Maybe he's conflict averse, or he's just been too busy. Regardless, your objective is to extract from him the problem he has with your attitude or performance. If you're lucky, your boss will come clean about your shortcomings, and together you can work on a plan to correct them and get your performance or attitude back on track. Ideally, as you give it your all to improve, his attitude toward you will as well. Ironically, you are less lucky if you find out that your bad boss is satisfied with your performance. If that's the case, he's being awful simply because he doesn't particularly like you, which puts you in the same position as the people who work for bad bosses who act the same way, just because that's the way they are. For all of you, the next question is, what's the end game for my boss? Sometimes it's obvious that a bad boss is on the way out. His own bosses have signaled as much to the organization, or he himself makes it clear he can't wait to move on. In either case, survival is just a waiting game. Deliver strong results and have a can-do approach until relief arrives. You're in a different boat if your bad boss is not going anywhere anytime soon. More than a decade ago, I developed a theory of the case to categorize types of leaders and to help me talk about who should stay and who should lead. I put leaders in 4 categories based on how well they lived G's values of candor, voice, dignity, and boundarylessness, and just what kind of results they were getting. Type 1 bosses are the people you want to reward and promote and hold up as examples to the rest of the company. Type 2 bosses have to go, the sooner the better. Type 3 bosses really believe in the company's values and practice them in earnest, but just can't get the results. Those individuals should be coached and mentored and given another chance or two in other parts of the company. Type 4 bosses are the most difficult to deal with. They often get to hang around for a long time, despite their awful behavior, because of their good results. Most good companies usually know about these people and eventually move them out. But every company, even the good ones, keeps some Type 4 managers for longer than they should. It's such a dilemma for bosses at every level. They hear the grumbling down below, but they see the great numbers right in front of them, which leads to a kind of organizational inertia. Take the case of a man I know of, whom I'll call Lee, who ran a 30-person division of a communications company. Formerly a successful writer himself, Lee created a competitive, almost frantic environment in the office, with the staff churning out more copy than divisions twice the size. At the same time, he held the team to extremely high standards of creativity, a major plus in the eyes of headquarters. But Lee had a mean streak a mile wide. His humor could be cruel, and he particularly let loose on young, inexperienced employees. He also reveled in his intensely adversarial relationship with the division's unionized employees, which poisoned the division's atmosphere for everyone. Lee held his staff in a kind of terrorized thrall. Many people liked the prestige of working in his high-performing division, but they hated his day-to-day nastiness. Top performers often stayed only a year or less, but Lee was protected by the industry's laws of supply and demand. There was always another young, ambitious writer or artist ready to sign up. And so, despite the constant turnover, the organization's top management let Lee stay and stay, until he died of a heart attack. After he was gone, one of his former employees said, "It took an act of God to get rid of him." Usually, a bad boss with great numbers doesn't have to die for senior management to replace him, but it can take a cataclysmic event to provoke action. Take Karen, a senior-level boss at a money management firm. Karen managed 15 fund managers and their teams, about 200 people combined. The company was known for its ruthless, hard-driving culture, and Karen epitomized it. She worked 18-hour days. She publicly denounced fund managers who underperformed, occasionally reducing people to tears in meetings, and routinely belittled the support staff, snidely referring to them as the Danielle Steele fan club, since many of them were middle-aged women who read popular novels during their lunch breaks. When Karen's bosses were around, however, her persona became thoughtful and caring, earning her the nickname of Sybil, after a woman with multiple personality disorder who was the subject of a best-selling book. For more than a decade, Karen's money managers posted impressive results, significantly outperforming comparable funds. But when the internet bubble burst, the cost of her management approach began to show. Fund managers were heavily invested in high-growth stocks to make their numbers and avoid Karen's ire. In fact, their biggest holdings were in Enron, WorldCom, and Tyco. When Karen was fired, senior managers made a big show of denouncing her management style. Many of her people shook their heads in amazement. It had been in evidence for years, but it took a disaster to make management confront it. You may not work at a company that lets a bad boss hang around until a mess erupts, but it's possible great numbers will keep your bad boss around indefinitely. If you feel that's the case, your next question should be, what will happen to me if I deliver results and endure my bad boss? If you think that your organization, in particular your boss's boss or someone in HR, understands your bind and sympathizes, you should feel pretty confident that eventually you'll be moved up or sideways as a reward for surviving. While you're waiting, hang in there and give the job your all. I was fortunate to have many great bosses during my career. They encouraged me, protected me, built my self-confidence, and gave me challenges that stretched my abilities. Reuben Gutow, my boss for more than a decade when I was starting out, did all these. He kept the mammoth bureaucracy of GE off my back while I learned real-time how to build a business from scratch. I was able to travel the world in my 20s, setting up joint ventures and making small acquisitions. It took 17 years for me to bump into a bad boss. It wasn't that Dave Dance, a vice chairman, was actually bad. It was just that I was in the running for the CEO job, and he strongly supported another candidate. Every day felt like a week. No matter what I did, I felt that Dave was rooting for me to fail. What an awful feeling when your boss is not on your side. I tried to stay out of his way. I hung out at headquarters as little as possible. I spent my time in the field with people I liked, doing what I liked to do, reviewing businesses. My situation was a lot easier than it is for most people. I knew that it couldn't last more than a couple of years. And I also knew the potential reward if I endured, and it was big. You may not have that luxury. But be careful. Uncertainty about the final outcome can make you do something foolish. That is, pull an end run. You may feel the impulse to sneak upstairs and talk to your boss's boss about the situation. That can be suicide. About 90% of the time, complaining about a bad boss to his boss circles right around to bite you on the rear. The big boss may have your best interests at heart when he scolds your boss for his behavior, but you can be absolutely sure that your life will only become more unpleasant afterward. There is a reason why kids don't tattle on bullies. Unfortunately, the same principle applies in the office. There will always be an element of uncertainty to enduring a bad boss. You may surmise a happy ending or be promised one, but there are very few guarantees. All you know for certain in this kind of situation is that going to work every day isn't fun, which is why you need to ask the following. Why do I work here anyway? Remember how, in the chapter on finding the right job, we talked about the inevitability of trade-offs? It is rare for a job to be perfect in every way. Sometimes you stay in a job for the money or the friends. Sometimes you give up money and friends for the love of the work itself, or its job location, or its lack of travel. Sometimes you stay in a job because the company has so much prestige you know it'll help you get a new job once you have a few more years of experience under your belt. When you find yourself in a situation with a bad boss that isn't going to change anytime soon, you need to assess your trade-offs and ask, are they worth it? If the answer to this question is no, then start constructing an exit plan that gets you out the door with as little damage as possible. On the other hand, if your boss situation offers some kind of long-term benefit that you understand and accept, you really have no choice. Focus on why you are staying and put your bad boss in perspective. He isn't everything in your life. He's the one downside of a career or life deal you have made with yourself. More than anything else, come to grips with the fact that you are staying with a bad boss by choice. That means you've forfeited your right to complain. You can't consider yourself a victim anymore. When you own your choices, you own their consequences. In a perfect world, all bosses would be perfect. That happens so infrequently that entire movies and books are written about bad bosses. not to mention lots of country and western songs. When you get a bad boss, first find out if you are the problem. That's not easy, but in many cases, a bad boss is just a disappointed one. If you're convinced you aren't the problem, ask yourself if your company is likely to keep a bad boss with good results. If the answer is yes, the only thing left to do is look at the trade-offs you are willing to make. Is your job worth the price of enduring a bad boss? If so, put up and shut up, to put a twist on the old saying. If the trade-off is not worth it, leave gracefully. And as you start your next job, remember exactly what made the bad boss bad and how it made you feel, so that when the time comes for you to be a boss, you won't do the same. The final chapter in the career section is something on everyone's mind: work-life balance. If ever there was a case of do as I say, not as I did, this chapter is it. No one, myself included, would ever call me an authority on work-life balance. For 41 years, my operating principle was work hard, play hard, and spend some time as a father. Had the concept been around at the time, I'm sure I would have described my life as perfectly balanced. It felt like it had everything in it, all in the right amounts. I grew up in an era and as part of a culture where you struggled to go to college and get a decent degree. During school, or very shortly thereafter, you got married and started having kids. Getting a job and working your ass off at it was considered the ticket to a good life. I followed this pattern without a lot of thought. Luckily for me, I found work to be enormously exciting. I saw the weekends as a time to play golf and party with other young couples. But looking back, it is clear that the balance I chose had consequences for the people around me at home and at the office. For instance, my kids were raised largely alone by their mother, Carolyn. By the same token, from my earliest days in plastics, I used to show up at the office Saturday mornings. Not coincidentally, my direct reports showed up too. Personally, I thought these weekend hours were a blast. We would mop up the work week in a more relaxed way and shoot the breeze about sports. I never once asked, is there someplace you'd rather be or need to be for your family or favorite hobby or whatever? The idea just didn't dawn on me that anyone would want to be anywhere but at work. My defense, if there is one, is that those were the times. In the 60s and 70s, all my direct reports were men. Many of those men were fathers, and fathers were different then. They did not, by and large, attend ballet recitals on Thursday afternoons, or turn down job transfers because they didn't want to disrupt their kids' sports careers. Most of their wives did not have jobs with their own competing demands. In general, it was assumed that wives stayed at home to make everything run smoothly. All that started to change, of course, in the 80s, when women started moving up in the workforce, and by late in the decade, I started to hear a lot more about work-life balance. It initially bubbled up in many of our management development classes at Crotonville, where managers started to describe the pressures they felt trying to manage travel and transfers in two-career households. Debate about the topic within GE became more intense in the early 90s, both at Crotonville and during meetings with the GE African American Forum, and it reached a new level of intensity later on during my meetings with members of the company's women's network. These conversations forced me to confront something that I had never really confronted for myself: the conflicts involved in managing two full lives, the one at work, and the one after hours, being it caring for kids, volunteering at a homeless shelter, or running marathons. While work-life balance was increasingly front and center during the 90s, the debate about it has only intensified since my retirement in 2001. Today, no CEO or company can ignore it. In fall 2004, for instance, the New York Times ran a front-page, 3-part series on work-life balance and job stress. That same week, Fast Company's cover story was entitled, "Still Worried About Work-Life Balance? Forget it, but here's how to have a life anyway." There's a whole consulting industry devoted to the subject, and too many books and websites to even estimate a number. Not surprisingly, then, as I've traveled around the world for the past 3 years, I've gotten slews of work-life balance questions. The most common is, how'd you find time for all that golf and still become CEO? But they ran the gamut. Once in Beijing, a man in the audience who looked to be in his 30s asked me, "How did you manage your children while you were managing GE?" My answer to these questions have been of limited use, I'm sure. I say that I found time for golf because I didn't spend my leisure time on much else. As for my children, I didn't manage them, except to crack the whip on grades and play social director during my 3 weeks of vacation each year. Their happy lives today have a lot more to do with their mom than with me. So I'm clearly no expert on just how individuals should prioritize the various parts of their lives, and I've always felt that choice is personal anyway. But I have dealt with dozens of work-life balance situations and dilemmas as a manager and hundreds more as the manager of managers. And over the past 3 years, I've heard from many people, both bosses and employees, about this complex issue. From all these experiences, I have a sense of how bosses think about work-life balance, whether they tell you or not. You may not like their perspective, but you have to face it. There's lip service about work-life balance, and then there's reality. To make the choices and take the actions that ultimately make sense for you, you need to understand that reality. 1. Your boss's top priority is competitiveness. Of course he wants you to be happy, but only in as much as it helps the company win. In fact, if he's doing his job right, he's making your job so exciting that your personal life becomes a less compelling draw. 2. Most bosses are perfectly willing to accommodate work-life balance challenges if you have earned it with performance. The key word here is if. 3. Bosses know that the work-life policies in the company brochure are mainly for recruiting purposes, and the real work-life arrangements are negotiated one-on-one in the context of a supportive culture, not in the context of, but the company says. 4. People who publicly struggle with work-life balance problems and continually turn to the company for help get pigeonholed as ambivalent, entitled, uncommitted, or incompetent, or all of the above. 5. Even the most accommodating bosses believe that work-life balance is your problem to solve. In fact, most know that there are really just a handful of effective strategies to do that, and they wish you would use them. A few words on what work-life balance really means. It is no coincidence that work-life balance entered the public domain about the time that women, and especially mothers, in dual-career households started working in force. Suddenly there was a whole group of people juggling two mutually exclusive and colliding demands, being great parents and great employees at the same time. Especially in the early days, the struggles to make everything work were messy and painful for many working moms, and their stories were filled with guilt, ambivalence, and anger. Today, work-life balance remains largely the purview of working mothers, in that they are the people most likely to be grappling with the issue on a daily basis. But without question, work-life balance as a concept has grown and expanded. It isn't just about how mothers can make time for all the demands in their lives. It's about how all of us manage our lives and allocate our time. It's about priorities and values. Basically, work-life balance has become a debate about how much we allow work to consume us. Now, you can be like me and my type and make work your major priority. Or you can attempt a kind of literal balance, with work and life each getting 50% of your time. Or you can go surfing 80% of your time and work 20%. There are as many work-life balance equations as there are individuals. But no matter what balance you choose, you'll have to make trade-offs. After all, as I've noted before in this book, it is a rare and lucky person who can have it all in life, all at the same time. Usually, that's not the case. Working parents who want to be very involved in their kids' lives, for instance, often have to give up some of their ambition. People who put business success first most likely have to give up some level of intimacy with their kids. Work-life balance is a swap, a deal you've made with yourself about what you keep and what you give up. I remember one Q&A session with about 500 executives in Melbourne, Australia, where the moderator was Maxine McHugh, one of the country's most respected newscasters. The session was moving along on all the usual business topics for about an hour when a woman in the audience stood and said, "Could you tell me, Mr. Welch, why must all women who succeed in business act like hard-ass, bull-headed men? When will we see the day that every female CEO doesn't have to be like Margaret Thatcher?" I can't recall my exact answer, but I know I said something very politically incorrect right off the bat about how most women slow down their career advancements by having children. And while I thought that was a worthy choice, it wasn't going to get them to the boardroom very quickly. This comment enraged the questioner, who shot back, "Why must women give up their lives to get ahead while men do not? Women should not have to make all the sacrifices, should they?" Some of the men in the audience groaned, and one called out, "My wife did." Another one shouted, "Hey, we all make sacrifices." Up on stage, I shrugged. "I cannot give you a good answer to your question," I said. "I'm not sure that pausing on the corporate ladder is a sacrifice to the mothers who made that choice." Just then, Maxine stepped in. To be honest, I expected a real slam, but her answer surprised me. "Women do give up something. It's biology," she said. "Let me tell you what I gave up. I wanted my career, and so I never had children. Maybe I'd be able to do it with children now. Still, 25 years ago, when I was entering broadcasting, it just wasn't possible to achieve the highest levels and raise babies along the way. It was my choice. Of course I wanted children, but I chose to put my career first, and I cannot blame anyone for my happiness or lack thereof." You could have heard a pin drop. In the silence, someone raised his hand and changed the subject with a question about the Australian economy. I tell this story because you can't talk about work-life balance without acknowledging that it's so contentious because it's so personal and so universal. Everyone these days makes work-life balance decisions, from working mothers and fathers to single people who want to write a novel or volunteer to build homes for Habitat for Humanity. Work-life balance means making choices and trade-offs and living with their consequences. It's that simple and that complex. Just remember, you are not in this alone. Your company also feels the impact of your choices and actions. And with that in mind, let's take a work-life balance reality check from your boss's point of view. 1. Your boss's top priority is competitiveness. Of course he wants you to be happy, but only in as much as it helps the company win. In fact, if he's doing his job right, he is making your job so exciting that your personal life becomes a less compelling draw. Clearly, most bosses want their employees to have great personal lives. Nobody wants their people hauling family or social problems into the office, where they can leak into the atmosphere and do nothing for productivity. Then there's that matter of retention. Satisfied people tend to stay where they are and work with more enthusiasm. So all in all, good bosses don't want their people to feel unbalanced. But more than that, bosses want to win. That's what they're paid for. And that's why they want all of you. Your brain, your body, your energy, and your commitment. After all, they have a big game to win, and they can't do that effectively with absentee players, in particular if the other team draws its players from countries like India and China, where work-life balance is not exactly a cultural priority. The fact is, work-life balance concerns are actually a luxury, enjoyed largely by people who are able to trade time for money, and vice versa. You can bet your bottom dollar that the Korean grocer who just opened his shop in New York doesn't worry about whether he has time to get to the gym, just as you can be absolutely certain that 99% of the entrepreneurs in China's huge emerging competitive workforce don't wring their hands about working late every night. Your boss is fully aware that most competitors in the global marketplace do not invite their people to decrease their productivity in the name of work-life balance. That's why when your boss thinks about meeting your work-life balance needs, he is guided by the question, how can I accommodate this person and still keep him or her totally riveted to the job? The truth is, your boss wants 150% of you. And if you are good enough, he will do almost anything to get it, even if your family wants 150% too. It's not that bosses want you to give up your family or your hobbies or any other interests. It's not that diabolical. They're just driven by the desire to capture all of your energy and harness it for the company. In most cases, bosses see a good offense as their best defense against life's yearnings. And that offense would be to make work so exciting and so much fun that people don't actually want to go home for dinner, let alone play amateur chess or write the great American novel in their attic. For many years, Gary Reiner worked for me as the head of business development in Fairfield. Although he never advertised it, Gary had clearly made a work-life balance choice, where time with his family played a large role. Every day he showed up early at the office, but he was a stickler about leaving at 6, and he rarely engaged in the banter that slowed work down. He was about as cool and efficient as you could get. But Gary was a star in every way. His performance in a corporate staff job year after year opened up huge operational opportunities for him. But he always said he liked what he was doing. His travel load was manageable, and he didn't want to move. That was okay with me. I loved what he was doing, and the whole company was benefiting. But I worried, as I'm sure Gary did, about how long we could keep a staff person fresh and engaged. I didn't want Gary to leave GE or just check out mentally. For the next decade, every time we launched a major initiative, from services to Six Sigma to e-business, we asked Gary to take charge of organizing councils comprised of leaders from each business to transfer best practices around the company. Along the way, he took on the role as Chief Information Officer for the company. Gary stayed put, but just about every couple of years, he expanded the scope of his job, bringing great value to GE while remaining true to his work-life balance choices. Gary's story is an example of thousands like it that take place every day. A boss pulling out the stops to keep a star performer hooked and excited. I knew what Gary needed and what the company needed. And fortunately, with his intellectual curiosity, commitment, and energy, we found a solution where everyone won. So every time you think about your work-life balance issue, remember what your boss is thinking about, and that's winning. Your needs may get heard and even successfully resolved, but not if the boss's needs aren't met as well. 2. Most bosses are perfectly willing to accommodate work-life balance challenges if you have earned it with performance. The key word here is if. Admittedly, there are bosses out there who think, I never got any special kind of help with my work-life issues, and I'm not going to give any. Each person has to make it on his own. Moreover, there are many people who don't have children, who frankly resent their coworkers, who ask for a special pass because of their family responsibilities. I've heard these individuals say things like, they wanted to have children, now they want us to make it easy for them. That perspective is not particularly charitable, but I can understand where it's coming from. Actually, the reality of the workplace is that there are very few special passes. Yes, bosses are agreeable to giving people the flexibility to come and go as they please, but only after they have earned it with their performance and results. In fact, I would describe the way work-life balance really works as an old-fashioned chit system. People with great performance accumulate chits, which can be traded in for flexibility. The more chits you have, the greater your opportunity to work when and where and how you want. You cannot talk about this chit system, however, without mentioning FaceTime. FaceTime is a big deal at most companies, especially when it comes to promotion. Despite all the technology that makes virtual work possible, most managers are simply more comfortable promoting people they've gotten to know in the trenches, people whom they've seen in meetings and hallways or lived with through a really tough crisis. Your work from off-site may be spectacular. You may be the most productive person on your team. Your current job may not even technically require you to come into the office. But when push comes to shove at promotion time and qualifications are close, bosses will almost always give the job to the devil they know. And nothing makes a person familiar like showing up. For an example of a typical chit system in action, let's take the case of Susan Peters. Susan joined GE in 1979 at age 26 as an HR manager in appliances. She quickly distinguished herself as a high potential and was moved several times to give her new challenges. In 1986, 3 months after her daughter Jess was born, Susan was working in Pittsfield, and unexpectedly, her boss had to undergo serious back surgery and needed to be out for a long time. In a big step up, she was named head of HR over other more senior people. She hit the ball out of the park. Next, Susan moved to Holland, then back to corporate headquarters, then back to Pittsfield. 2 years later, we moved to Louisville to head up the human resources for the appliances business. In every job, her performance was terrific. In 1998, we needed to fill the HR job in our medical business in Milwaukee, and we knew what to do. Send Susan Peters. When she was called, everyone expected a fast and simple, "Okay, when do I start?" Instead, she said, "I just can't. I have family issues here that I have to resolve." It was as if a bucket of cold water had been poured on our heads. We had never given a thought to Susan's personal life, and she had never brought it up. Even when we sent her for 8 weeks of training, 4 in Japan in 1992 and 4 in China in 1993, she hadn't made a peep about being away from her daughter or managing a dual-career household from the road. Suddenly, here she was asking for a break, and we were mortified. Damn it, we thought. How many people like Susan Peters had we lost along the way because they took our silence about work-life as indifference? We couldn't give Susan her break fast enough. By that point in her career, her pile of chits was about a mile high, far higher than she would have ever needed to reach out for assistance. We told her not to worry and stay put. Our main concern at that point was that she successfully resolve her family issues. That took a couple of years. Never once in that time did anyone at the company mention Susan's new limitations in a negative context. Then in 2000, Susan told us she was back in the game, and we quickly promoted her to head of HR at NBC. She is now the Vice President of Executive Development for the whole company, based in Fairfield, making her the number 2 HR executive at GE. When you ask Susan about her career, she says, basically, I learned that you can have all the work-life balance you want if you deliver. I'm not saying it wasn't hard at certain points. It was hard. When I went to Japan and China, my daughter was about 7, old enough to lay a real guilt trip on me. I cried my eyes out all the way over, but I had made a conscious decision about work-life balance, and part of that decision was to travel for my career. I knew I'd always have flexibility in my job when I needed it. I had earned it with commitment and performance over the years. Contrast Susan's story to that of a friend of mine who managed a 60-person unit of a fast-growing company. A few years ago, she was approached by a member of her team, let's call her Cynthia, who had just had her second child. Cynthia asked if she could work at home on Fridays. The executive, a working mother herself, immediately said yes, because she knew that Cynthia, an 8-year veteran of the company, would continue to deliver stellar results. She always had. In fact, she was one of the hardest working, most organized, and productive members of the staff. After a week or two, word got around the office that Cynthia was working from home on Fridays. Soon enough, my friend was approached by a young guy, we'll call him Carl, who had been at the company for about a year with no distinguishing results. He, too, wanted to work at home on Fridays. I want to perfect my yoga practice, he explained. When my friend said no, the conversation got very awkward. You're imposing your values on me, Carl said. You're saying that mothering has more value than yoga, but I'm never going to have children. Who are you to say that my yoga is less meaningful in my life than Cynthia's children are in hers? Sorry, but that's the decision I made, the boss shot back. Later, when the confrontation hit the gossip mill and distracted Carl's co-workers for a week with many debates over fairness and values, my friend came to regret the fact she hadn't been more direct in her answer. Carl couldn't work at home on Fridays because he hadn't demonstrated he could do the job at the office Monday through Thursday. Despite her own personal circumstances, my friend's decision hadn't been about yoga versus babies. It hadn't been about values at all. It had been about results. Carl didn't have any chits. What does this mean for you? It means that as you think about work-life balance, know that to get it in most companies, you have to earn it. That process will take time. One last thing to know about the chit system. To people just entering the workforce, it often seems unfair. Why, they wonder, do you have to wait to get the freedom and flexibility you want? But more experienced people tend to get it. In fact, many see the give and take of chits as perfectly equitable. Finally, bosses like it too. For them, it's a win-win deal. 3. Bosses know that the work-life policies in the company brochure are mainly for recruiting purposes, and that real work-life arrangements are negotiated one-on-one in the context of a supportive culture, not in the context of, but the company says. A company brochure can be a sight to behold, with its glossy photos and long lists of lifestyle benefits, such as job sharing and flex time. But most people know that the last time you look at the company brochure is the first day at work, when you fill out your insurance paperwork in the HR office. In fact, most savvy people realize pretty quickly that most brochure work-life balance programs are primarily a recruiting tool aimed at new candidates. Real work-life balance arrangements are negotiated by bosses and individuals on an as-needed basis, using the performance for flexibility chit system we just talked about. That chit system requires a special environment. It requires a supportive organizational culture where bosses are encouraged to strike creative work-life deals with high performers, and high performers feel entirely comfortable talking with their bosses about their work-life challenges. In such a culture, bosses have the freedom to reward results with flexibility. They don't have to clear work-life arrangements with HR, nor do they feel forced to adhere to formalized work-life policies that actually might limit their ability to win, rather than enhance it. Remember the case of the boss who had the employee who wanted to work at home on Fridays to practice yoga? In the end, when the news of the incident reached senior management, she was told to agree to his request. It was company policy to offer equal opportunity for flexible working arrangements. Merit had nothing to do with it. It should come as no surprise that this yoga employee didn't last another year at the company. With just 4 days at the office, his performance continued to deteriorate, and just as damning, he got branded by managers within the business unit as a but the company says kind of employee. You know the type. They bank vacation days. They hand in slips of paper noting how many half days or holidays they've worked. They remind bosses and colleagues of company policies regarding overtime. They are little technocrats who show time and time again that they're not working for fun or the passion to win. They're just logging hours. No wonder they don't have many chits in the bank. By operating outside the culture of one-on-one negotiated arrangements, these rule book types screw themselves right out of the rights they claim they are owed. The point here is, don't get carried away by the work-life policies and programs advertised in virtually every corporate brochure. If you want real work-life balance, find a company that accommodates it as part of its everyday business. 4. People who publicly struggle with work-life balance problems or continually turn to the company for help get pigeonholed as ambivalent, entitled, uncommitted, or incompetent, or all of the above. In September 2004, the Financial Times published a story about Vivian Cox, who at age 45 was appointed head of the Power, Gas, and Renewable Energy Division of British Petroleum. The paper noted that the promotion made Miss Cox one of the most powerful businesswomen in the world. It also noted that she had 2 small children and that she never talked about their impact on her ability to work. Vivian Cox, the newspaper said, is part of a generation of high-achieving women who just want to get on with the job. There are, without doubt, tens of thousands of Vivian Coxes, and surely in total there are millions of successful working people, mothers and others, who have full and busy personal lives, achieved without griping about how hard balance is and how much help they need from their companies to attain it. The fact that these people exist makes it very hard in the real world to be a work-life moaner. And that's why most work-life moaners eventually get marginalized. Sometimes it takes a while because companies want to be politically correct, and they tiptoe around people who publicly identify themselves as work-life poster children. But with time, people who can't seem to get their work-life challenges in order or continually ask the company for special arrangements get held back or pushed aside. Not surprisingly, work-life moaners tend to be a phenomenon of below-average performers. Here's my theory on why. You almost never hear people in the top 20% of any organization complaining about work-life balance. That fact is surely linked to their intrinsic abilities. At home as at work, they are so smart, organized, and competent that they have figured out and implemented sustainable solutions. They have installed, as Susan Peters calls them, home processes of backup resources and contingency plans that take a lot of the uncertainty out of juggling situations. Below average performers, by contrast, have 3 strikes against them. First, they tend to be less expert at organizing their time and sorting through their priorities, not just at work, but at home. Second, because of their middling performance, these people have been told they have limited chances of advancement. That lowers their self-confidence and raises their ambivalence. And finally, they're not as financially secure as people in the top 20, giving them fewer resources to buy work-life balance with nannies or personal trainers or whatever. Put all 3 dynamics together, and it's no wonder underperformers struggle publicly with work-life dilemmas and ask for help so often. As the HR director at a New York company told me, it's always my weakest people who want the most flexibility from the company. That's frustrating, to put it mildly. Not surprisingly, he also said, don't use my name if you quote me on this. So before you open your mouth a 5th time to ask for limited travel and Thursday mornings off, or occupy your boss's time with concerns over your child care arrangements, know you are making a statement, and no matter what words you use, it sounds like, I'm not really into this. 5. Even the most accommodating bosses believe that work-life balance is your problem to solve. In fact, most of them know that there are really just a handful of effective strategies to do that, and they wish you would use them. Look, only you can figure out your values and priorities. Only you know what trade-offs you're willing to make, and only you can envision their consequences. Only you can organize your schedule and your life at work and at home for the balance you have chosen. That is why, at the end of the day, most bosses correctly believe work-life balance is your problem to solve, not theirs. Now, some managers are very adept at helping people go through the process of sorting out priorities and selecting trade-offs, and even in coming up with scheduling solutions that work equally well for their employees and the company. In fact, they see that activity as an integral part of their jobs. But helping people find work-life balance is really a special skill. Not every manager has it, and not every manager wants it. Some managers feel, what the heck am I supposed to be now? A mother and a therapist? Forget about it. But many do not. In my speaking and consulting engagements over the past several years, I'd estimate about half of all managers want to actively work with their employees to help them achieve some form of balance. That's a lot more than 5 years ago. There can be no question that negotiating work-life balance arrangements adds a layer of complexity to a manager's job. But your manager should welcome the challenge. It gives him another tool to motivate and retain great performers, just like salary, bonuses, promotions, and all other kinds of recognition. But along the way, you can and should help yourself. The work-life balance debate has now been out there long enough that a handful of best practices have emerged. Most experienced bosses know about these techniques. In fact, many use them, and they wish you would too. Here they are. Best practice 1. Keep your head in whatever game you're at. We've already established that work wants 150% of you, and so does home. To alleviate angst and distraction, and to enhance your performance no matter what you are doing, be focused on where you are and whom you are with. In other words, compartmentalize. No one wins when you routinely run your family's carpool logistics from your office phone or email customers from the soccer field. Compartmentalizing isn't easy, obviously. Sometimes you must call a customer from the gym or check on a sick child between meetings. But the more you blend your life, the more mixed up, distracted, and overwhelmed you feel and act. Technology is a two-edged sword on this. On the one hand, you can be home for dinner 3 nights a week when you have the ability to check email on your BlackBerry from 8 to 10 p.m. On the other hand, you can give yourself a real ulcer by encouraging your office to call your cell phone while you are skiing. The absolute ideal is to draw crisp boundaries around your activities. Then when you're at work, keep your head in work. And when you're at home or play, keep your head there, and only there. I realize this is something of a fantasy land. There will always be pressures on whatever rules you set, but the smaller and less frequent the interruptions are, the more balance you will actually feel. Best practice 2. Have the mettle to say no to requests and demands outside your chosen work-life balance plan. Eventually, most people come up with a work-life balance arrangement that works for them. The trick is sticking to it. That takes discipline. Saying no is hard, especially for business people who've gotten ahead precisely because they have said yes so often. I will always be impressed by Bill Woodburn, who was running GE's industrial diamond business in the late 1990s. We asked him to run a division several times that size, but he had the clarity about his priorities to say no, despite our efforts to persuade him. He had a daughter with 2 years to go in high school, and he just didn't want to uproot her. Today, Bill's daughter has long since graduated, and he's been promoted twice. He's now president and CEO of G's infrastructure businesses. Usually, however, you don't need to say no to something as large as a promotion to get the balance you want. You just need to say it to smaller stuff. A request that you join yet another nonprofit board, a plea to coach yet another kid's sports team, and the like. If you say yes to everything, you won't get balance. You'll get off balance. Saying no is incredibly liberating. Try it on anything and everything that is not part of your deliberately chosen work-life plan. Best practice 3. Make sure your work-life balance plan doesn't leave you out. A really killing dynamic in this work-life balance thing is the everyone's happy but me syndrome. Very competent people figure out a perfect work-life balance plan that allows them to deliver enough of themselves to the office, enough of themselves to home, and enough of themselves to 1 or 2 volunteer organizations. The problem is, this perfect plan creates a kind of fun-free vacuum for the person at its center. Of course, work-life balance involves making trade-offs, and decent people are obliged to deliver on their commitments to home and work. But if you craft a work-life balance plan while you are having no fun, chances are you won't be able to sustain it. You have to make sure your work-life balance plan fulfills your dreams and passions. If that means working a lot, do it. If that means being home every night, let that happen too. Yes, you have to be responsible to those around you, but you can't live someone else's concept of your life in the name of balance. Well, you can, but you shouldn't. It almost always backfires. We all know outwardly happy-looking people who juggle huge career and family demands only to suddenly stop and make drastic changes to their lives. They've just had enough of hanging on by their fingernails. One person we met recently at a cocktail party explained her decision to throw it in this way. I hadn't really had a good laugh for 15 years. I hadn't read the newspaper with a cup of coffee, or played with a dog, or called an old friend. It felt like every single minute I was struggling with logistics in order to meet everyone's needs but my own. Technically, I was a good enough wife and mother, and I was good enough at my job. Everyone else was okay, but I was miserable. I had to quit or I was going to collapse. Today, this woman works from home. Her family has less money, and she will tell you she misses her old life as a professional. But at least she can breathe and laugh. Work-life balance is not a decision you make alone. You have to confront how your choices affect a myriad of others. But if you don't fulfill your own joy with your plan, all the balance in the world is just duty. One day you'll wake up and find yourself in a special kind of hell where everyone is happy but you. And that doesn't do anyone any good. When you get right down to it, there are only a few things you need to know if you want to have it all. Outside of work, clarify what you want from life. At work, clarify what your boss wants, and understand that if you want to get ahead, what he or she wants comes first. You can eventually get what you both want, but the arrangement will be negotiated in that context. Make sure you work in a supportive culture where performance matters and you can earn flexibility chits with great results. Earn a lot of chits. Redeem as needed. Replenish often. Achieving work-life balance is a process. Getting it right is iterative. You get better at it with experience and observation, and eventually, after some time passes, you notice it's not getting harder anymore. It's just what you do. And now we come to the end of the book, tying up some loose ends. Back in the introduction, I said I was inspired to write this book by the questions I received traveling around the world over the past several years. Most of these questions and my answers to them ended up fitting into the 19 chapters preceding this one. A few questions, however, just couldn't be wedged into one topic area or another, be it leadership, hiring, change, strategy, or work-life balance. They were too broad, narrow, specific, or unusual. They just defied categorization. And yet these questions actually call to mind several of the themes that run through this book. The importance of candor and positive energy, for instance. The effectiveness of differentiation. The importance of voice. The power of authenticity and meritocracy. And the absolute necessity of change. And never letting yourself be a victim. So I'm going to end this book with the questions that I call the ones that almost got away, hoping that they cover any territory I've missed and perhaps even remind you of some of the major signposts of the territory we've covered so far. This question was posed at a working dinner in Mexico City, attended by about 30 CEOs from various industries. It went like this. We spent the last 10 years bringing our company up to speed with training and process improvements. And with our low-cost labor, we were extremely competitive. But now we're getting killed by China. How can we stay alive? I've heard some form of this question everywhere, except China, of course. When I was in Dublin in 2001, for instance, a couple of months after Gateway announced it was closing up shop, an Irish technology executive anxiously asked, "Does this mean the end of the long boom for us?" In Milan in 2004, I spoke with a German manager who wondered if his company's only hope was to sell out to an Asian company that wanted his European distribution capability. At a conference in Chicago the same year, a machine parts manufacturer based in Cleveland described in agonizing detail how the Chinese kept lowering and lowering the price of their competing products. He asked, will there be any manufacturing left in Ohio? There is no easy answer to the China question. Yes, you hear about China's problems, its scarcity of middle managers, for instance, and the massive number of poor farming families moving into unprepared cities with not enough jobs to support them. Lumbering, bureaucratic state-owned enterprises still make up most of its economy, and the country's banks are saddled with bad loans. But for China, these aren't mountains to be scaled. They're blips to be flattened by the giant high-speed bulldozer that is its economy. Increasing prosperity from spectacular economic growth over the past 20 years has given the Chinese enormous self-confidence. But China has so much more, a massive pool of low-cost, hard-working laborers, and a rapidly expanding number of well-educated engineers. And then there's its work ethic, which may be its single biggest strength. Entrepreneurship and competition are baked into the Chinese culture. Consider the executive who hosted me during a week-long visit to Shanghai and Beijing last year. She says she's at the office from 7 a.m. until 6 p.m., goes home to dinner to join her husband and son until 8 p.m., and then returns to work until midnight. This is very typical here, she said, 6 days a week. And she works for a U.S. multinational. So faced with the inevitability of China, what do you do? First and foremost, get out of the tank. The sense of bleakness that I heard from Mexico to Milan and across the United States is perhaps understandable, but it doesn't get you anywhere. It's not as if the developed economies of the world are in shambles. The developed world has large consumer and industrial markets, all thirsting for products, with great brands and distribution mechanisms to serve them. Its economies have open and mature legal systems. They are transparent societies with democratic governments and good education and social systems. Its businesses have fully developed management processes. The United States has the added advantage of a large, thriving venture capital market with the capability to provide seed capital for just about any good idea. The list of the developed world's competitive advantages could go on and on. So think positively. At the very least, a can-do attitude is a place to start. Remember my description of the Japanese threat in the early 80s? At times, it felt like we were dying, and everyone seemed to agree. Journalists and political pundits predicted the imminent demise of industrial companies like GE, and you couldn't blame them, given the circumstances. Inflation was double-digit, and the prime rate peaked at more than 20%. In Syracuse, we were making TV sets that cost more coming out of the factory than the Japanese were selling them for in a mall less than 2 miles away. It sure felt like the worst of times. But that's the point, really. In the heat of battle, it always feels like the worst of times. Low-cost competitors are not new. Hong Kong and Taiwan have been in the game for over 40 years. And Mexico, the Philippines, India, and Eastern Europe have been a factor for some time. Even in the late 90s, when the wind was at everyone's back and making money was easier than it had been in decades, work felt really hard. Big companies were labeled dinosaurs, and it became conventional wisdom that technology startups would soon rule the world. In fact, it was said whole industries were going to be obliterated by the internet. Then the bubble burst. Many of those little companies that were going to rule the world disappeared. Others like eBay and Amazon not only survived, they thrived. But so did the so-called dinosaurs, because they changed. They grabbed the new technology and transformed themselves, emerging stronger than ever. And change is what China demands of us now. How? First and foremost, bring out the 3 old war horses of competition: cost, quality, and service, and drive them to new levels, making every person in the organization see them for what they are, a matter of survival. Take costs. Everyone needs to be searching everywhere, inside the company and out, for best practices. Hard calls need to be made about where and how every single process should be performed to ratchet up productivity. Don't think about reducing costs by 5 to 10%. You have to find the ways to take out 30 to 40%. In most cases, that's what it's going to take to be competitive in the China world. On quality, you just can't have a ship and fix mentality. Getting it right 95% of the time is not good enough. Use Six Sigma or any methodology you like, but get rid of defects. Service is the easiest advantage to exploit. China is thousands of miles away from most developed markets. Remember Gary Drug, the tiny pharmacy in our neighborhood, where not only do they know your name, they deliver it to your house within an hour? It's standing strong against its China, the big, shiny chain store pharmacy 3 blocks away. And think about the Mexican CEO who asked this question to start with. His country's proximity to the United States gives it a huge advantage in response time. Again, your challenge is not just to improve, it's to break the service paradigm in your industry or market so that customers aren't satisfied They're so shocked that they tell strangers on the street how good you are. FedEx and Dell come to mind as examples of this. While you have to innovate to improve cost, quality, and service, go beyond that. Take a new, hard look at your market. Search out untapped opportunities. Find new niches. Just don't keep pounding out the same stuff. That market you're serving may seem saturated, but it's filled with plenty of demand for exciting new products, services, or technologies. That's what Procter & Gamble discovered recently. There was no company more set in its ways than P&G. But in less than 5 years, the company instilled a whole new vigor into its innovation efforts. It broke its NIH syndrome and scoured every corner of the world for garage inventors with cutting-edge ideas. And they didn't stop there. The search for new ideas led them to create networks into other companies, suppliers, universities, research labs, and venture capitalists. They took some of the ideas they found and fine-tuned them, and used others to reinvent existing products. For instance, P&G took the tried-and-true electrostatic technology used to paint cars and applied it to its cosmetics business, transforming the way its makeup products go on the skin. With a new can-do attitude, the company also revitalized in-house R&D. The result was products like Crest White Strips and the Swiffer cleaning products, which literally invented whole new mass-market categories. And finally, while you're innovating and searching for new products, markets, and niches, come to terms with the fact that China can be much more than a competitor. Think of China as a market, an outsourcing option, and a potential partner. Unlike Japan in its early development, China's huge market is relatively open to direct investment. Many can go it alone there, ideally selling their product in the Chinese market while sourcing product for their home market. Alternatively, you can join forces with a local business. Needless to say, Chinese joint ventures aren't easy. In my experience, to make them happen, you have to make sure the Chinese partner feels as if it has gained a lot, perhaps more than you. But there are ways to craft win-win deals. When GE Medical formed a joint venture in 1991, its Chinese partner brought great local market know-how. That was a big factor in the company's achieving the #1 market share in imported GE high-end imaging products. At the same time, the joint venture's Chinese engineers designed and built low-cost, high-quality products that were exported through GE's global distribution network. Now, I don't want to sound like a Pollyanna about China. Its presence is a real game changer in business today. And even if trade restrictions get enacted, its currency is allowed to fluctuate, and intellectual property laws are passed. No political solution in the world is going to make it go away. But China is a classic case of the glass half empty or half full, isn't it? You can look at the situation and feel victimized, or you can look at it and be excited about conquering the challenges and opportunities it presents. Now pick the latter. You just can't win wringing your hands. This question was posed by an audience member in London at a conference attended by about 3,000 middle and senior managers. The question went like this. Norway has just passed a law mandating that half of every corporate board be comprised of women. What is your opinion on that? My answer? It's ridiculous. Obviously, I'm not against women directors. They've made major contributions to thousands of boards around the world. In fact, one of the best directors I've ever known is a woman who served on the GE board, Gigi Michelson. the former Director of Human Resources at R.H. Macy and head of Columbia University's Board of Trustees, whose people insights and general wisdom guided me for 2 decades. Nevertheless, I just don't like quotas, in the boardroom or in the office. Winning companies are meritocracies. They practice differentiation, making a clear distinction between top, middle, and bottom performance. The system is candid and fair, and it's the most effective way for an organization to field the best team. Quotas undermine meritocracies. They artificially push some people ahead, independent of qualifications. That can be demotivating to the top performers who are passed over. And it doesn't do much for results either, when unprepared people are thrust into important jobs. Okay then, so what does work? Return for a minute to the Getting Promoted chapter. Its advice is color and gender blind. If you want to get promoted, your best bet is to over-deliver on your results, manage your subordinates as carefully as you manage your boss, get on the radar screen by supporting major initiatives early, relish the input of lots of mentors, and always have a positive, high-energy approach to life and work. At the same time, don't make your boss use his political capital to champion you. And when setbacks occur, and they will, don't let them break your stride. I'm not saying women and minorities haven't had a tough go of it in the business world. They have, and they do need mechanisms to give them a higher profile in the system. One such mechanism is diversity groups, like GE's Women's Network or its African American Forum. These groups have created an opportunity for successful women and minority executives to serve as role models. Just as important, they provide a setting to talk about the ways women and minorities can increase their experience and skills, and thus their visibility in an organization. They promote the concept that success is a function of talent, energy, and drive, just as meritocracies are. But the whole subject of diversity is more nuanced and complicated than I am making it out to be. At GE, the African American Forum was a grassroots effort that started in 1990. It was bumping along without a lot of momentum until a senior vice president, Lloyd Trotter, grabbed it by the neck and gave it a whole new energy with seminars, conferences, and mentoring programs. With Lloyd in charge, every African American in the company wanted to get on board, and all of Lloyd's peers wanted to jump in to help. The group really took off, and in time, so did promotions for African Americans. On the other hand, in the mid-90s, I would have dinners twice a year with high potential women, where we would discuss the work-life issues they were facing. In 1997, after a long give and take, I challenged the group to create their own version of the African American Forum. They seemed enthusiastic, but much to my surprise, over the next few weeks, I found that some of our top women were balking at the idea. They felt they had made it without any label. They didn't want to be thought of as successful women. They wanted to be thought of as successful executives. After a couple of years, much of that faded, as even the most reluctant grew to enjoy their mentoring and its positive impact on the progress of women in the company. Back to the quota question about Norway. The only quota that I ever thought worked was the exposure quota we used at GE. That is, we made sure there was a woman or minority candidate on every slate for the top 2,000 jobs. That guaranteed every manager saw the diverse candidates out there and that diverse candidates had a shot. I spent the first half of my tenure as CEO focused on changing the portfolio and competitiveness. Diversity for me didn't come into play until the 90s. But today, if you want to field the best team, you simply can't afford a delay. I've received this question numerous times from audiences from New York to Sydney. How did you pick your successor, Jeff Immelt, and how do you think he's doing so far? I'm always thrilled to answer the second part of this question. It's such a layup. Jeff is doing amazingly well, even exceeding my expectations for his leadership. I couldn't be more proud of where he has taken GE and where it is going. Jeff became chairman and CEO of GE on September 10, 2001. So it was technically his second day on the job when the terrorist attacks changed the game for everyone. Jeff handled the new uncertainty of the business environment with characteristic thoughtfulness and determination. Despite the resulting downturns in the airline, power, and reinsurance industries, he masterfully navigated the company to modest annual earnings growth from 2001 until 2004. At the same time, Jeff made significant changes to the portfolio that positioned GE for future growth. He made major media, medical, financial services, and infrastructure acquisitions while disposing of slower growth industrial and insurance assets. He reinvigorated GE's research and development activities with large facilities investments in Munich, Shanghai, and Schenectady, New York. And Jeff has put enormous emphasis on diversity at GE with immediate and positive results. Several times in this book, I've said that change is good. Jeff sure proves that point. As for how and why I picked Jeff, I just don't ever talk about that. There were three terrific people to choose from: Jeff, Bob Nardelli, and Jim McNerney. There is no reason to conduct a public autopsy on the process. It's past. Both Jim and Bob have gone on to spectacular runs in their new roles. Bob as CEO of the Home Depot and Jim at 3M. What I will say is at the end of the day, the board and I picked whom we believe to be the best leader for GE. And Jeff is making us all look very good. This question was posed at a management conference in Reykjavik, Iceland, and during a 12-person dinner in London. What's the future of the European Union? My answer? Long-term, it's very good. With all the sound and fury about China, some people see the EU as a huge, lumbering bureaucracy that will never get its collective act together fast enough to reach its full potential in the global economy. Maybe that's true in the short run, but in time, the EU will prove naysayers wrong. Remember, the economic EU is less than 15 years old. It's already come a long way. Imagine trying to put together the 50 states of the United States today. Now imagine doing that if each state had operated for centuries with a separate government, set of laws, language, currency, and culture as the members of the EU have. That the EU has done so well in so short a time is actually sort of amazing. Without question, the EU still has a long way to go before it realizes the economic hopes and dreams of its supporters. But its current statistics are enough to give you a sense of the potential to be unleashed. With 25 countries, the EU has 450 million people, 50% more than the United States, and a GDP of $11 trillion, about the same as the United States, 2.5 times Japan, and about 7 times China. These numbers are impressive, but they'll only get better as the EU feels the impact of its newest members: Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, the Czech Republic, and the other nations of New Europe. In the past decade, from Budapest to Bratislava, from Prague to Warsaw, I've seen the excitement, optimism, and the remarkable achievements in these countries. A new generation of entrepreneurs and small business people are thirsting for opportunity and success. Their governments have responded in kind, reducing taxes and providing other pro-business incentives. The result has been significant economic growth, especially in comparison to what's going on in old Europe. Yes, old Europe has problems and a long history. Brussels is filled with bureaucrats, and the individual governments of many countries are fighting tooth and nail to hang on to their hard-earned sovereignty. With their entrenched cultural traditions, France and Germany in particular are lukewarm about the EU and often act with blatant self-interest. But these problems are not insurmountable. Washington, Tokyo, and Beijing have plenty of bureaucrats too. And as new generations of political leaders emerge across Europe, and the leadership of the EU itself gains increasing stature with every passing year, the pull of parochial, old economic order governments will give way. For example, the French government recently began to ease its rigid support of the 33-hour work week and is now proposing that companies be allowed to negotiate directly with employees about work schedules. In time, and perhaps sooner than many expect, global competitive pressures and the energy of New Europe will have a powerful combined effect. The paralyzing weight of socialism will gradually give way, and the EU will move steadily forward, fueled by an ever-increasing acceptance of capitalism. This question came at a technology and innovation conference in Las Vegas that spanned 3 days and featured about 20 speakers. I was one of them. How do you think corporate boards will change because of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act? This question, which I heard in various forms and in many locations, including Australia and Europe, reflects a growing attention on governance, a topic for discussion that used to be reserved for shareowner meetings and business school classrooms. Then, of course, came the post-bubble corporate scandals, and people began to ask, where the heck were the boards in all these messes? Why didn't they see the funny business? Very quickly, laws and regulations were passed to make boards and senior executives more accountable for any corruption that might occur on their watch. In general, these rules, such as the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, are a good thing, necessary to restore economic confidence. But laws will never guarantee good corporate governance. There is no way that a board's finance committee, comprised of a finance professor, an accountant, and several busy CEOs, all from far-flung locations, can spend a couple of days every month studying a company's books and verify that everything is on the up and up. Imagine being a board member of a multinational bank. You have people trading everything, swapping Japanese yen for euros in London, and others betting on U.S. commodity futures down the hall. But even most small companies have too much complexity for a committee to track, with hundreds of transactions every day, near and far. While boards cannot be policemen, they must assure themselves that companies have auditors, rigorous internal processes, tight controls, and the right culture for that purpose. Boards play other roles as well. They pick the CEO and approve the top management. In fact, they should know the members of the top team as well as their own colleagues. Boards also monitor the mission of a company. Is it real? Do people understand it? Is it being executed? Can it win? Boards also gauge the integrity of the company. That's huge. They must visit field operations and conduct meaningful conversations with people at every level, eyeball to eyeball. It is in this subtle, nuanced integrity watchdog role that boards can make a real contribution. For some boards now, Sarbanes-Oxley will require a real change in behavior. They'll need to stop thinking about their jobs as 8, 10, or 12 closed-door meetings a year with lovely catered lunches. For others, it'll only reinforce their existing approach. Now, in the rush to deal with scandals, perhaps some aspects of Sarbanes-Oxley went too far. For example, the rules that imply the superiority of independent directors over directors who have some sort of stake in the company, either as investors, suppliers, or any other form of business partner. This new requirement needs a relook with a big dose of common sense. There's nothing wrong with directors having skin in the game. For the shareowner's sake, directors should really care about how the company is doing. But the notion that independent directors are better for the company is having the unintended consequence, in some cases, of removing good judgment and experience from where it is needed most. Take the case of Sam Nunn, the distinguished former U.S. Senator from Georgia, or Roger Penske, the automobile industry entrepreneur. Both were required to leave GE board committees. Why? After leaving the Senate, Sam joined King & Spalding, a law firm that GE had done business with for decades. In Roger's case, he had a minority interest in a small GE truck leasing joint venture. Or take the case of Warren Buffett. Activists wanted him off the audit committee at Coca-Cola because of his large ownership stake. Who would represent the shareowners better on key committees than these three people? A professor? An accounting expert? The head of a charitable foundation? Why would shareowners ever want company executives answering to people who might need a director's salary to make ends meet? Those kinds of directors are less likely to challenge anything. They're more likely to duck tough issues in the hope they'll get reappointed. Now, let's not forget in all this conversation that boards exist to support and guide, as well as challenge management. It would be unfortunate indeed if Sarbanes-Oxley ends up making boards primarily adversarial in their approach. Board members can never forget their main job is to make the company work better, not to get into an us versus them dynamic with the very people they are supposed to help. In the final analysis, the best directors share 4 simple traits: good character, common sense, sound judgment, particularly about people, and the courage to speak up. Laws are all well and good, but it is people, culture, processes, controls, and strong directors that ultimately put compliance in a company's blood. This next question came at a breakfast meeting in Copenhagen with about 30 European managers doing business for their global companies in Scandinavia. The question went like this: I'm about to be transferred to run our operations in West Africa, and I've been told to expect that 40% of my workforce have AIDS or a family member suffering with the disease. Any suggestions for dealing with this problem? No question ever floored me like this one. And as if it wasn't disturbing enough on its own, another person at the breakfast, an executive from a consumer goods company, spoke up right afterward. I'm just back from our operations in Africa, he said. Try closer to 60%. What can a leader do in such a dire situation? What can a company do? It is in confronting a societal problem that the results of a winning company and a good culture really come together to make a difference. At the outset of this book, I tried to make the case that winning is great because it inspires people to be happy, creative, and generous. That was me talking from 20,000 feet. This question brings you right into the trenches. The manager who asked this question worked for a highly profitable oil company, and I could feel that he really wanted to do something. He'll be able to because his company is winning. He can launch programs to educate the workforce about AIDS. He can provide medical facilities and subsidize the expensive drugs the disease requires. He can really improve the lives of hundreds of people. And I'll bet he does. Winning companies help all the time. There are more than 50,000 active volunteers among GE's employees, involved in 4,000 projects a year, from mentoring in schools around the world to participating in countless other programs for the disadvantaged. Because of the efforts of GE volunteers, there have been amazing community projects in Hungarian towns, Jakarta slums, and inner-city schools in Cincinnati. Not only were these projects great for the people who were helped, they were equally beneficial for the people doing the helping. Their volunteering in the streets gave their work at the office more meaning and vitality. In Slovakia, Krishna Veta showed up in 2002 to manage U.S. Steel's newly acquired 16,000 employee plant in Košice, a city with 23% unemployment in the impoverished eastern region of the country. Chris and his team took a real relic of communism, a money-losing state-owned enterprise, and with a $600 million investment, turned it into a highly profitable operation. While they were doing that, they poured time and money into Košice. The list of their contributions is too long to mention here, but it includes building an oncology wing at the local children's hospital, remodeling primary school classrooms and providing them with computers, and refurbishing several orphanages and a facility for the blind. Consider also the outpouring of support from businesses around the world after the tragic Christmas tsunami of 2004. In a matter of days, companies and their people donated billions of dollars in cash and supplies to help people in ravaged communities. It was generosity of the highest order. I'm not talking here about motherhood and apple pie or trying to sound like the typical annual report. This is how good business really works. Winning companies give back, and everyone wins. This question came from the reporter who moderated my Q&A session at a management conference for about 3,000 people in London. The question was, do you plan to enter politics? In a word, my answer was never. It's not that I don't appreciate government. We're all grateful to public servants who've made national security and the eradication of terrorism their life work. On top of that, government provides other services that are vital to a thriving society. Schools, hospitals, and police, to name just three. But government, for all the good it does, is filled with all the problems that business has. But nobody seems to have the latitude to fix them. Basically, government is riddled with bureaucracy, waste, and inefficiency. In a company, you can clean those up, and you have to. In government, they're forever. Why? For one, because it's difficult to move people up or out based on merit. Most government agencies have no differentiation to speak of. You can work for 40 years, never excel or make a dent in results, and still get an annual raise. For another, you just cannot speak or act candidly in government without getting nailed. It's a world filled with compromise, patronage, and quid pro quo. Yes, all these behaviors exist in business, but managers can rally against them on their own or join a company that does so as a matter of course. Finally, governments can afford to be bureaucratic because they don't compete. During the last election season, the governor of Indiana created a big hoopla around the fact that he was going to withdraw the state from an outsourcing project that one of its departments had started in India. There was much cheering him on as a model of patriotism. It had to make you laugh. It was easy for the governor of Indiana to withdraw from India. In the public sector, you don't have to provide the highest value products or find the lowest cost solutions in order to create revenue. You can just keep raising taxes to pay for everything. So as important as government is, it's just not for me. This book makes the point that it's always better to do something you love. I've taken my own advice on this one. I've received this question everywhere. How's your golf game? Wow, do people love golf? Everywhere I go, perhaps because I stuck a chapter on golf in my last book, people ask about my handicap and whether it's improved since I retired. The answer is, I don't play anymore. And believe it or not, I don't miss it all that much. My obsession with golf lasted almost 60 years. From my first days playing and caddying at age 10 until my first back operation in 2002. I've had 2 more back operations since then, and thankfully, my back is better now. But I'm sure not inclined to test that proposition with a golf swing. If you've had back problems, you probably understand where I'm coming from. But in the absence of golf, a whole world of new interests has opened up to me. You can't believe how much time is available when you're not on the golf course all the time. I've loved consulting with several companies and their CEOs. I've also found I'm crazy about modern art, and I'm getting to live out my lifelong devotion to the Red Sox by attending as many home games as I can. I've been able to travel around the world with my wife and 4 stepchildren and enjoy the sights beyond the conference rooms and factories, and been able to meet the many interesting people whose questions grew into this book. I have always loved new stuff. Looking forward, learning, and growing have always felt good to me. Golf was wonderful. It gave me great friends that I've enjoyed for decades and always will, and all the fun of competing. But when you can't play, you can't play. And amazingly, the world doesn't even end. And finally, this question was posed by an audience member at a management conference in Frankfurt, attended by about 2,500 people. Do you think you will go to heaven? After a few seconds of stunned silence, my first answer to this one was, well, I sure hope that's long-range planning. But after the audience stopped laughing, they were as surprised by the question as I was. The man who asked this question made it clear that he wanted to understand what I considered my legacy. First off, I hate the word legacy. It just sounds so arrogant. Presidents and prime ministers have legacies. I ran a company and wrote a book or 2. But here we are at the end of this book, and the question did get asked, so I'll attempt an answer. If there is anything I would like to be remembered for, it is that I help people understand that leadership is all about helping other people grow and succeed. To repeat myself, leadership is not just about you, it's about them. I would also like to be remembered as a huge advocate of candor and meritocracy, and believing everyone deserves a chance. And I'd like to be remembered for trying to make the case that you can never let yourself be a victim. Now, it's no secret that I've made plenty of mistakes in my career. I've made some bad acquisitions, hired some wrong people, and move too slowly in some opportunities. And that is just a fraction of the list. As for my personal life, I have 4 great children and 9 terrific grandchildren. My love and admiration for them cannot be expressed with words, and their happy, fulfilling lives today give me no end of pleasure. I had 2 marriages, however, that did not work out. Life goes on, and usually for the better, but no one lives through a divorce or 2 and feels proud that it happened. So as for heaven, who knows? I'm sure not perfect, but if there are any points given out for caring about people with every fiber of your being and giving life all you've got every day, then I suppose I have a shot. Given the choice, of course, I'd rather not find out anytime soon. There's so much more to do. Let me acknowledge many of the people who helped me with this book. Business is about people. In fact, life is only people. Family, friends, colleagues, bosses, teachers, coaches, and neighbors. At the end of the day, it is only people that matter. People made this book. First, there were the thousands of men and women around the world who, as my dedication says, cared about business enough to raise their hands and ask the questions that fill these pages. I thank them for candidly sharing their stories, talking openly about the ever-changing challenges of work, and for helping me codify my thinking about how to get it right. I'm also grateful to the people who took an hour or 2, and often more, to talk with me about their experiences so that the ideas in this book could be filled with life. Bill Harrison and Jamie Dimon of J.P. Morgan Chase, Steve Klimkowski of Northwestern Memorial Healthcare, George Tamke, a partner at Clayton Dubilier and Rice, David Novak, who runs Yum Brands, Bob Nardelli of the Home Depot, Robert Bagby of A.G. Edwards, Perry Ruddock, the retired vice chairman of Smith Barney, Maxine McHugh of the Australian Broadcasting Company, Kevin Scherer of Amgen, Jimmy Dunn of Sandler O'Neill and Partners, my old friend Paolo Fresco, former vice chairman of GE and retired CEO of Fiat, Jerry Roach of Heidrick and Struggles, Joel Klein, chancellor of the New York City Public School Systems, Jim McNerney of 3M, Paolo Monferino of Case New Holland, Dara Khosrowshahi of Expedia, and Chris Navetta of U.S. Steel. And from GE, Bill Conity, Gary Reiner, Susan Peters, Dennis Dammerman, Mark Little, John Krenicki, and Charlene Begley. Bob Nelson, my financial analyst at GE for many years, was a very valuable reader along the way. Several people don't appear by name in this book, but their ideas were critical in shaping its content. Linda Gosden Robinson, president of Robinson, Laird and Montgomery, shared her considerable experience with us for the chapter on crisis management. For the chapter on work-life balance, I'm indebted to Professor Stu Friedman of the Wharton School and Claudio Fernandez of the executive search firm of Egon Zehnder. The chapter on mergers and acquisitions was helped by a long, insightful conversation with M&A expert David Fubini of McKinsey & Company. And my tiny newfound knowledge of philosophy is totally thanks to the insights of Nancy Bauer, professor at Tufts University. This book started with 2 pages of scribble notes about what it could be. The finished product in your hands is thanks to a stellar group of people, most notably the 4 E's and a P people at HarperCollins. Our wonderful editor, Leo Sparrow, whose probing mind and passion for this book never ebbed. Jane Friedman, a fervent believer from the get-go. And Marion Manica, whose deep wisdom guided us all the way. We're also grateful to the terrific team that marketed this book: Brian Murray, Joe Tessitore, Steve Hanselman, Paul Oslewski, Keith Pfeffer, and Larry Hughes. The book's designer, Leah Callison-Stanisic, and its copy editor, Ann Greenberg. Our agent, Helen Reese, was a dear friend and enthusiastic supporter, and Megan Lamothe did tenacious duty as our fact-checker. My assistant, Roseanne Badowski, read every draft of this book, challenged the content, picked apart the phrases, and made every chapter better. Her caring and attention were remarkable, and I thank her for the endless hours she gave this project. Finally, there aren't enough words to thank my wife, Susie, for the job she did on this book. Her relentless questioning pulled out of me every idea I ever had about business, and her ability to organize and rephrase my, in many cases, random observations made this book so much better than I ever dreamed it could be. I always tell people that Susie is just about the smartest person I have ever met, and during the last year of writing this book, she has proved it and then some. For every chapter in this book, Susie wrote and rewrote countless drafts, and yet she never took a break from being an amazing mother to her 4 great kids. Every day, she astonishes me. For the last year, we have had the greatest time, day and night, debating and discussing all the material that went into this book. The conversation never stopped. As I traveled the world, meeting people, answering questions, and asking plenty of my own, Susie was by my side, listening, analyzing, and opening my mind to what I knew and what more I could know. It was hard work and pure joy. Susie, you made it happen. Jack Welch, Boston, February 2005. And now for a conversation I had with Jane Friedman.
I'm Jane Friedman, President and CEO of HarperCollins Worldwide. And right now I have just finished reading Winning by Jack Welch with Susie Welch. And I have gone through this manuscript and I have underlined and underlined and underlined. And I am a CEO and I'm learning all about how to be a better CEO from reading Winning. The first question I have for Jack is why Winning now? And how did it come to be? And how did you work with your co-writer, Susie Welch?
Well, let me start with the first one. We were out on the road giving Q&A sessions at a variety of different locations, sometimes to 300 people, sometimes to 5,000. And the questions were incredible. People were constantly asking me the real hard, nitty-gritty business questions. And it was during the time of some of the crises here, the global scandals. And people had a down view of business. And winning wasn't a very good thought at the time. And I really felt that the millions of people that are out there working in the right way, in the right time, needed to have their questions answered, best I could do it. And it was time for a book that said why winning is good and why winning is the fundamental roadblock of building people's lives and how business is the engine of a society. And I try to make the case for that in here. As for working with my wife, that was a really great treat. I mean, it was also the first year of our marriage, which always people laugh and say, how could you do that in your first year? Anyway, it was an incredible experience. We would talk for a week or so about a chapter. She would drag stories out of me that I had forgotten years back. She's a great editor and great writer, and she just kept pulling and pulling. And then after she got enough, she'd go sit down and write a first draft of a chapter. And that began a process. And we had second drafts and third drafts and fourth drafts and fifth drafts, sometimes 20th drafts between the two of us, picking away, trying to get a concise story to answer the questions that people had asked us.
Did you fight?
No, it's amazing, and people will never believe that story. We hold our ground on certain positions? Yes. Did we take words seriously? Yes. She more than I did, but we in the end did not have what I would call a real fight.
Is honesty always the best policy?
Well, I'm not talking so much about honesty. I'm talking about here about telling it like it is, seeing a business situation as it is. A lot of time is wasted, Jane, with people not wanting to face into reality, not wanting to deal with issues as they are, not wanting to confront weak colleagues, not wanting to reward strong colleagues for the fear of hurting the feelings of weak colleagues. So there's a lot of things where candor could just speed the whole process up. Look, we got a bad situation. Let's dig in and deal with it. And Joe and Mary aren't going to help us. Let's not use them. Let's get it done. I'm often with groups, and they're shocked by the fact that within each other, they all agree that they know the answer. Everyone's afraid to say it for the fear of impacting others, looking foolish, any number of things. But getting it all on the table is a big deal.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I do believe that when the millions of people read Winning and take it to heart, that candor is going to help all of us as CEOs. It is absolutely essential. But one of the other things that really surprised me, although I now understand it completely, is when you say that you believe the head of human resources is as important as the CFO. Those are big words.
Yeah, but I lived them. I lived them for 20 years as CEO, and I saw there isn't a CFO in the company that I work for that wouldn't consider his peer as HR manager equal to him in the organization. And there isn't an HR person that even thinks the CFO is close, probably. But look, if winning is about fielding the best team, getting the best players on the field, the best talent, the best writers for you, the best editors for you, the best musicians in an orchestra. You need help as a CEO, as a leader, as a manager. You want another input, and you want somebody to feel. The guy counting the score, how many tickets were sold is important, but nobody's going to come if the players aren't any good. And so the HR person gets the right players on the field.
Don't you think that the fact that for so many years HR was called personnel, that may be why it's taking the HR director a little bit more time to get up to speed, that somehow it had a diminished role, but now it certainly is one of the top positions in the company? There's an anomaly there of what personnel was and now human resources is.
Well, I think there's a little bit of that, but I think also personnel or HR as a training ground and a straight-up place is not a great place. I mean, you're doing the picnics and you're doing the company newspaper and you're organizing the parties. I think that, for example, if I were in HarperCollins, I would take one of the most respected editors, writers who had savvy, who could see around corners, who could, in fact, smell a phony a mile away. And I'd put that person, man or woman, right next to me as HR person. The organization would say, holy cow, Jane Friedman means it. She's brought so-and-so, who's the best at this, to do this. So you got to change the whole perception, because the perceptions in organizations have HR at such a low level. I'm not talking just CEOs. I'm talking about the people that run divisions in HarperCollins. They have an HR person. They've got to take somebody that's a star. Fellow in G that was running HR for me was a plant manager. He had seen it all, negotiated with unions, done everything. He was a street guy. He knew everything.
Makes such good sense, such good sense. The other thing that makes such good sense as we are about to go into our own budgeting process is, what is this? You talk about in Winning how you can really just eliminate so much wasted time, effort, charts, everything else, and just for the CEO to know what he or she wants, the division head to know what he or she wants, and to come in, have a realistic position, and go out 10 minutes later and say, let's do it.
Well, I think the issue is this. There's this crazy ritual where it starts months ahead of time at the bottom with poor souls bubbling up numbers and putting them all together and getting this book together with one objective, to come up with a low number to present to the next level, because for years we've made it clear that if you missed your number, you got punished. If you made your number, you were a hero. So there's a big exercise in minimalization, I call it. How little can we get away with? How little can we sell? Now, think of how different the dynamics of a meeting are when you both come in and say, here's what I think I can do, but I need all these resources. Then you're arguing about making an acquisition, giving them more salespeople, giving them more advertising money. And you can make those calls, but you're all talking about growing the business bigger. It's a much better conversation. You end up with the same number. You end up with the same place, but the dialogue is so much different. Instead of me trying to convince you how little I can do, I'm trying to sell you on, give me some resources to let me take my HarperCollins division to a level it's never seen before. The conversation is 180 from what it normally is. In the phony budgeting process where the lights go out and the slides go up, and the teams negotiate, and at the end, one team says you can give me 10, another team says you can give me 6, and you end up with 8. You spend a whole day in a room. Silly.
It's so interesting because you know Rupert Murdoch, who is my big boss. You know him very well. And I believe that he believes in your way of budgeting, because our budget meetings are the most interesting meetings we have all year. It really comes down to conversation, to sharing, to stretching, to coming in with ideas that can then be expanded and exploited, rather than just coming in and fighting for that sandbag number, or on the other side fighting for something that really is not going to be achievable and just cause stress.
And that's why you guys are growing. I mean, because people that think that way grow. I mean, Rupert could never sit through a grinded out meeting negotiating. It's not his style.
Absolutely right. In Winning, you talk about 8 aspects of leadership, and they are the aspects that one would expect of a leader. But what do you think about yourself? Do you exhibit all 8 of them? Where do you fall short if you do? I personally don't think you do, but if you think you do. And of the 8, do you have one that you think is the one that's absolutely the most critical, or is it a package?
Well, I think it's a package, but I think you absolutely, to be a great leader, have to energize people. I mean, in the end, you are a lone wolf. And if you're managing a small grocery store with 8 people in your store, you want those 8 people turned on. You want them saying, "Good morning, Mr. Jones. Good morning, Miss Rogers. Thank you for coming in." You want every touch possible. You want them to feel ownership and excitement and participate in the fruits of the place. I mean, if you're energized and you can't execute, it isn't any good. But if you had to pick one, I'd want somebody that can excite the room, excite the team, and make them ready to take the hill.
Well, there's no doubt that optimism and that ability to energize really can change the entire tenor of a company and lead that company to become a winning company. In reading Winning, you talk so much about the 20-70-10 rule, which you are famous for. And there are some people who have been critical of your 10, wipe them out. But they have also felt that your 70, that you really have spent a lot of time in your career building the 70. I liken the 70 to the backbone of our business, the backlist of a publishing business, because that's what really keeps us going as we move the backlist, as we make the backlist stronger, and as we sell more copies. Your 70 are people who you feel can move into the 20 to lead the company. Can you talk about how this differentiation makes winners out of everyone?
Yes, because if you take, and the 20-70-10, as I point out in the book, has been called everything from Darwinian to cruel to this and that. What it is, if it's understood, you can't have 20-70-10 without having a company that practices candor and exhibits trust. You can, and one of the things in my first book, where I talked about 20-70-10 briefly, everyone out and did it. And they got all kinds of trouble, lawsuits, everything else. As people said, wait a minute, I'm not in the bottom 10. I'm clearly not in the bottom 10. You told me I've been nice for 25 years. Well, you need a candid appraisal system in place before anyone implements this in any way. But let's take the bottom 10. People say, it's so cruel, you fire them. You don't fire them. You tell them they're going to have to leave within a year. Guess what? 75% of them go anyway. Who wants to hang around a place where you're in the bottom? Nobody likes to feel that way. But they might have even wondered if they were. But when they're told they are, they go. And they find better jobs, and they thank you for it. In the middle 70, you always give them bonuses. You always give them, not as much as the top 20, but you let them know you care about them. You let them know they're important. You outline their shortcomings and their strengths. Let them improve. And these 20-70-10 designations are not locked in concrete. They are basically a point in time. So that point in time is how you look. But you can move. And somebody in the top 20 can't fall asleep up there and stay there. But you want your top 20 to know you love them. You want to pay them. You want to reward them in every way, in the soul and the wallet. You want to take care of them. And the bottom 10, what people do in businesses and in companies, and in orchestras and in schools. Schools in particular, I see in the New York City school system. The bad get too much attention. The lousy business, where does the CEO fly to, or the manager? They go take care of their problems. And somebody's growing at 15% over here, you leave them alone. Well, maybe they ought to be growing at 30, and you ought to be spending your time there rather than trying to fix the break-even or the small loss business. Same with people. Trying to fix a bad employee is a loss proposition from day one. Part ways, do it fairly, don't humiliate the person, but get on with building great people. Don't hang around with people that aren't delivering or businesses that aren't delivering.
Boy, are you sensible. You make it sound so easy. We all know that it's not so easy. But I must say that in listening to you, in reading Winning, it all seems doable. And it all seems so right in terms of how one deals with people and with problems. When you talk about the top 20 and you talk about they're the stars of the company. And one of the points that you make in Winning that I think is so essential is that if one of your star leaves, replace that star in, I think you say 8 hours, which I think is absolutely correct. Anyone who has lost a star has known that when you start losing time in replacing that star, everything tends to look dismal. Did you have to replace, I don't recall, did you have to replace many of your top 20 throughout your career?
A couple, and I use a couple in there as examples. Here's what happens when you don't. Everyone knows who the top 20 are, and I think you nailed it very well in your question. When the top 20 leaves, some people start to say, should I be leaving? What's going to happen to the company? Your job as a manager at any level is to say, they left, boom, right in behind them another top 20, so that there's not a moment's insecurity. They didn't matter. The company goes on the next day as if nothing happened. We've done that right in the transition from myself to my successor. A very good fellow left to become CEO of a big company Albertsons. I thought, well, this is the book. And he came in the morning to tell us, and at 4 o'clock we announced his replacement. And the next day, the replacement was in his chair running the business, and a business that has 30,000 people was not leaderless for a moment.
Any regrets about your career?
You know, I've thought about that 1,000 times, and the answer is no. I mean, I made mistakes. I did some things wrong. I didn't do everything perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I gave it everything I had. I mean, I went at it like a madman every day. I loved it. And could I have done it better? Probably. But I have no regrets about the way I did it.
And winning is fun. Both your life, the book, and everything else.
It sure is, Jane. Thanks.
Thank you.
We hope you've enjoyed this program from Harper Audio. To order additional cassettes or CDs, or to receive a complete catalog of Harper Audio and Cadman titles, please call us at 1-800-331-3761. You might also try our website, www.harperaudio.com. Thank you.
Audible hopes you have enjoyed this program.